When people talk about Christmas miracles, they never mention the kind that almost gets you killed. My name is Clara, and the year I turned 14, I learned that even something as innocent as Christmas caroling can be used as bait by someone who understands how much we all want to believe the season is still pure. I grew up in a quiet town in Connecticut where everyone knew everyone, where wreaths appeared on doors the day after Thanksgiving, and where my grandparents' street turned into a glowing tunnel of lights every December. I loved it. I loved the candles in the windows, the smell of wood smoke, the way sound seemed softer when the snow fell. I honestly believed Christmas was the one time of year when nothing truly bad could happen. My grandparents had a tradition they never missed. Every Christmas Eve, after dinner, they would turn the TV off, make hot chocolate, and sit in the living room waiting for the carolers. For as long as I could remember, a church group from across town would come around in a cluster of 10 or 15 people, bundled in scarves and hats, singing Silent Night, while the younger kids tried not to slip on the icy sidewalk. My grandmother would always say the same thing. If you ever need proof there is still good in the world, listen to people singing in the cold for no reason, but to make strangers feel less alone. That year, I believed her. By the next morning, I never would again. It started snowing around 6 that evening. The flakes were big and wet, sticking to the window panes and turning the street into something out of a postcard. My grandfather was pretending not to doze in his armchair. My grandmother kept going to the kitchen for just one more cookie, and I was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a book I was not really reading. Every few minutes, one of us would peek through the curtains to see if any figures were moving out on the sidewalk. I kept imagining a crowd of bundled shapes, the faint start of "Oh, come all ye faithful" drifting in from the cold. The house felt safe and warm, the kind of safe that makes you careless. The doorbell rang a little after 9. It sounded too sharp in the soft quiet of the house, and all 3 of us jumped. My grandmother laughed, smoothing her sweater, and said, "That will be them." She told me to check the front window to see which group it was this year. I remember running to the window with this childish excitement building in my chest, pressing my face into the cold glass and breathing a cloudy circle into it. I expected to see a crowd. There was only one person standing on our porch. It was a girl, maybe a few years older than me. She was wearing a long dark coat and a red knit hat pulled low, with her hair tucked up underneath. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and she cradled a songbook in her gloved hands. She looked up as I peeked through the curtain and smiled, as if she knew exactly where my face was, behind the glass. There was nothing overtly scary about her, but something about a lone caroler on a night when there was always a group made my stomach tighten for a moment. My grandmother opened the door before I could say anything. A wave of cold air rolled into the living room. The girl's voice was soft but clear. "Good evening," she said. "Sorry to bother you this late. I am with the church group on Oak Street, but the others were not feeling well, so I decided to continue the route alone. Would you like to hear a carol?" My grandmother loved people too easily. She smiled at the girl the same way she smiled at the checkout clerks, the mailman, the kids selling candy bars for school. "Of course, dear," she said. Come, let us hear you." The girl tilted her head and began to sing Silent Night. I remember being struck by how beautiful her voice was. Pure, steady, the kind of tone you associate with choirs in big stone churches. It echoed strangely in the front hall, mixing with the creak of the old house settling in the cold. My grandfather had come to stand behind my grandmother, and even he looked affected by it, his eyes half closed. When she finished the verse, my grandmother clapped her hands together. "That was lovely," she said. "You must be frozen. Do you want to come in for a minute and warm up? We have hot chocolate." The girl hesitated for exactly the amount of time you would expect from someone who did not want to impose, but secretly hoped you would insist. Her smile widened just a bit. "Oh, that is very kind," she said. "Just for a moment, if that is all right." I remember a flicker of unease then. I cannot explain why. It might have been the way her eyes moved past my grandmother's shoulder before she stepped inside, scanning the room, lingering for a second on the hallway that led to the back of the house. It might have been nothing more than the fact that I had never seen a caroler come inside before. I opened my mouth to say something, but my grandfather had already stepped aside to let her in. The moment the door closed, the house felt different. The warmth that had seemed comforting just seconds before felt thick, almost suffocating. The girl unwrapped her scarf, slipped off one glove, and held the songbook close to her chest. She looked around with an expression that I might have called admiration if it had not been so careful. "You have a beautiful home," she said. "Have you lived here long?" My grandmother beamed. "Oh, for 30 years at least. We raised our children here. Now they send us their children for the holidays, so we do not get lonely." The girl's eyes slid to me, and for a moment I felt as if I were being measured. "This is our granddaughter," my grandfather said. "She is staying with us this Christmas. Her mother is working nights at the hospital." The girl nodded. "That is good. No one should be alone at Christmas." There was something off in the way she said it, a strange emphasis, like it was less a sentiment and more an observation. My grandmother put a hand on my shoulder and told me to pour the guest a mug of hot chocolate. I went to the kitchen, pretending not to hurry. As soon as I was out of sight, I stopped and listened. The girl lowered her voice, but I could still hear snatches of it. "Always wanted to see inside this house. Here it is one of the oldest on the street." My grandfather chuckled. "Old, yes. The basement is older than the rest, but it is solid." "Basement?" the girl said. "Is that the door down there?" I leaned just far enough to see into the hall. Her gaze was fixed on the narrow door at the end of the corridor, the one that led to the basement steps. My grandparents kept it locked. Always. I never questioned that before. My grandmother called my name, and I forced myself to fill the mug, to bring it back, to act normal. The girl accepted it with a murmur of thanks, but she did not drink. She just cradled it, letting the steam rise against her face, her eyes still wandering around, as if she were mapping the place. "How much longer until your group finishes?" my grandfather asked. "Not long," she said. "They might catch up any minute." There were no other voices outside. The street was completely silent. After a few minutes of small talk, the girl asked if she could use the bathroom. My grandmother pointed her down the hall to the left, just before the basement door. The girl smiled, set the untouched mug on a side table, and walked away. The sound of her footsteps faded. The house grew quiet again. Too quiet. I realized I had not heard the bathroom door close. I told myself I was being silly, that I had just missed it, that there was nothing strange about a teenage girl needing to pee after walking around in the cold. But the longer it stayed silent, the more the hairs on the back of my neck lifted. My grandmother went to collect the empty mugs in the kitchen. My grandfather sat back down in his chair with a sigh. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening so hard my ears rang. Finally, I could not stand it. I walked to the hall, trying to act casual in case she stepped out and saw me. The bathroom door was open. The light was off. The basement door was slightly ajar. We never left that door open. I knew that as surely as I knew my own name. I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding in my throat. cold air, somehow colder than the draft from the front door, seemed to seep up from the gap. I could not hear anything from below, but I felt something, a presence, the sensation of being watched from a dark place. "Grandma?" I called, my voice sharper than I intended. "Where did she go?" My grandmother appeared behind me, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She followed my gaze, and for the first time that night, I saw something like fear on her face. "Your grandfather locked that," she said. "I saw him do it after he checked the furnace this afternoon." She reached out and pushed the door. It swung inward with a soft creak. The basement stairs disappeared into blackness. The dusty smell of concrete and old wood drifted up, but underneath it was another scent, faint and sour, like sweat soaked into fabric. My grandmother called out, "Dear, the bathroom is on the left, not downstairs." There was no answer. A sound came instead from outside. Tires crunching on snow, a car door slamming, voices. I jumped and turned toward the front of the house. A moment later, there was a knock at the door, followed by a burst of chattering and laughter. My grandfather opened the door. The real carolers stood there, bundled in coats and scarves, 10 or 12 of them, kids and adults, sheet music in gloved hands. "Sorry we are late," one of the women said. "The van got stuck on Maple for a bit. We did not miss you, did we?" I walked back into the living room in a daze. My grandmother shut the basement door without saying anything and slid the deadbolt at the top. Her face had gone very pale. The girl was nowhere to be seen. Her coat, her hat, her songbook, her untouched hot chocolate on the table. The only proof she had been there. The carolers sang. I barely heard them. My eyes kept drifting to the hallway, to the closed basement door. When they finished, my grandmother pressed extra bills into the donation envelope with shaking hands and wished them a Merry Christmas in a voice that did not sound like her own. After they left, my grandfather checked every window and door in the house. The bathroom window was unlocked and open an inch, snow starting to blow in onto the sill. The paint around the latch was chipped in a way it had not been that afternoon. He closed it and locked it again, then went down to the basement with a flashlight, despite my grandmother's protests. He found footprints in the thin dust near the far wall. Our basement had no outside entrance, just concrete shelves, old furniture, and the furnace. But in the corner, beside the old workbench, some of the cinder blocks looked newer, the mortar fresher. He knocked on them and heard a hollow echo. The police came an hour later. They walked the house, checked the basement, took our statements. My grandmother kept repeating. She did not drink the hot chocolate. She came in and she did not drink it. One of the officers exchanged a glance with his partner when my grandfather showed them the blocked section of the wall. A week after Christmas, they broke it open. Behind the newer cinder blocks was a narrow crawl space, no bigger than a closet. It smelled like earth and mold. There were old blankets piled there, a couple of empty water bottles, food wrappers. Someone had been sleeping in that space. Someone had been coming and going in our house without our knowledge, through a basement window we did not even know could be pried, open from the outside. There were scratch marks on the window frame, tiny metal shavings on the sill. They never found the girl. They checked every church in town. No youth choir claimed her. No one recognized the description. The officers told my grandparents she was likely part of a group that used the holidays to scout older houses, that she might have planned to come back with others, that we had interrupted something. Maybe worse than a burglary. They asked my grandmother again why she had let a stranger inside. She cried for days after that. For a long time, I blamed myself for not speaking up sooner, for not trusting that uneasy feeling in my gut when I saw that she was alone, when I saw the way her eyes moved over the house like a blueprint, I still hear her voice sometimes when Christmas music plays. That clear tone wrapping itself around the word holy and twisting it into something else. We changed the locks. My grandparents sealed the basement window and installed a motion sensor light over the backyard. They stopped inviting carolers in after that. They would listen from the doorway, always with the chain on. My grandmother never gave that speech about proof of goodness again. Every Christmas Eve, when the snow starts to fall and the streetlights turn everything gold, I think about how close we came to sharing that house with someone we did not invite. Someone who had been waiting below our feet, listening to our footsteps overhead, memorizing our voices. People talk about Christmas miracles, like they are always about angels and bright lights. Mine was different. Mine was the sound of a van getting unstuck on Maple Street, and the sight of a group of real carolers arriving just in time to prove that the girl standing in our living room did not belong to any choir at all. I inherited my great-aunt Ophelia's estate in December of 2015, and I wish to God I had let it rot instead. The lawyers called me out of the blue on a Tuesday afternoon, saying a distant relative had passed and named me sole heir to her property in rural Vermont. I barely remembered Ophelia. She was my grandmother's older sister, someone whispered about at family gatherings but never really discussed. The few times I asked about her, my grandmother would get this tight look around her mouth and change the subject. All I knew was that Ophelia never married, never had children, and died alone in the same house where she was born. She was 93 years old. The house was even older. I drove up from Boston 3 days before Christmas, thinking I would spend a week sorting through her belongings, maybe find some antiques worth selling, then list the property with a realtor and be done with it. The house sat at the end of a long gravel drive that wound through bare trees and patches of dirty snow. It was a Victorian, 3 stories tall, painted a faded yellow that might have been cheerful once, but now just looked sickly in the gray winter light. The porch sagged. The shutters hung crooked, but the bones of the place were solid, and when I stepped inside, it smelled like old wood and lavender sachets instead of mold or rot. The lawyer had left the keys in the mailbox, along with a handwritten note that said, "Everything inside belongs to you now. Do with it what you will." I walked through rooms filled with furniture draped in white sheets, shelves packed with books whose spines had faded to nothing, and boxes stacked in corners like someone had been meaning to organize them for decades and never got around to it. It felt like a museum. It felt like a mausoleum. But it did not feel dangerous, not at first. I set up in one of the second-floor bedrooms, the one that looked like it had been a guest room at some point. There was a bed with a brass frame, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out over the backyard where snow was starting to fall again. I made myself coffee in the ancient kitchen and started going through boxes, sorting things into piles. Keep, donate, trash. Most of it was trash. Old magazines from the 70s, receipts for things purchased half a century ago, letters written in cramped handwriting I could not decipher. Then I found the photograph. It was in a wooden box tucked into the back of a closet on the first floor, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. The frame was ornate, carved dark wood with floral details, heavy in my hands. The photograph itself was large, maybe 10 by 12 inches, and so clear it could have been taken yesterday, if not for the clothing. It showed a Victorian family gathered around a Christmas tree in what I recognized as the parlor of this very house. There were 7 people. A stern-looking man with a thick mustache, a woman in a high-collared dress, 4 children in their Sunday best, and in the background, half hidden behind the tree, a 7th figure. That figure was blurred, not like the camera had moved, but like the person themselves was vibrating, out of sync with the rest of the image. I could not make out a face, just a vague shape, human-sized, standing in the shadows near the doorway. Everyone else in the photograph was perfectly sharp. I turned the frame over. On the back, written in faded ink, it said, "Christmas 1891, the Hartwell family." I should have put it back. I should have left it in the box and forgotten about it. Instead, I brought it upstairs and set it on the dresser in my room, propped against the mirror. I told myself it was interesting, a piece of history, maybe worth something. But the truth is, I could not stop looking at it. That blurred figure pulled at my attention like a loose thread I wanted to tug. That night, I lay in bed staring at the photograph in the dim light from the hallway. The figure seemed darker than it had in the afternoon, more defined somehow, though that made no sense. I convinced myself it was a trick of the shadows and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, made coffee, and passed the dresser on my way to the bathroom. I glanced at the photograph. The blurred figure had moved. I froze mid-step, my heart lurching. It was not in the background anymore. It was closer to the family, standing just behind the smallest child, a little girl with ringlets and a lace collar. The blur was still there, but the shape had shifted. I grabbed the frame and brought it close to my face, searching for some explanation. A crack in the glass, a smudge, a trick of the light. There was nothing. The glass was clean. The image was exactly as it had been, except for that one figure. I told myself I was remembering it wrong. People do that all the time, misremember details, especially in old photographs where everything starts to look the same after a while. I set the frame back down, took a picture of it with my phone, and made a note of the timestamp. If it moved again, I would have proof I was not losing my mind. The next day, December 23rd, I compared the photo on my phone to the one on the dresser. The figure had moved again. Now it stood directly behind the father, the tall man with the mustache. I could see the outline of shoulders, the suggestion of a head tilted at an unnatural angle. My hand started shaking. I took another picture. I did not know what else to do. On Christmas Eve, the figure was standing behind the mother. I could see details now that had not been there before. The shape of fingers, long and thin, resting on the woman's shoulder. The photograph was changing. Something inside it was moving closer to the family, one person at a time, and I could not explain it, and I could not stop looking. That night, I could not sleep. The house creaked and settled around me, the way old houses do, but every sound felt deliberate. I kept getting up to check the photograph, to see if it had changed again, and every time I looked, the figure seemed darker, sharper, more present. By 3 a.m, I was sitting on the bed with the frame in my lap, staring at it under the light of my phone's flashlight, trying to find some rational explanation. That was when I heard the music. It was faint at first, coming from somewhere downstairs. A piano, or maybe a music box, playing a tune I recognized but could not name. Something old, something that belonged to another century. I set the photograph down and crept to the bedroom door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The music was clearer in the hallway. It was coming from the parlor. I should have stayed upstairs. I should have locked the door and waited for daylight. But part of me needed to know. I went down the stairs one at a time, gripping the railing, my breath shallow. The music grew louder. It was not a recording. It had the mechanical quality of something being played on an old instrument. Notes slightly out of tune, tempo uneven. The parlor door was open. The room was dark except for a faint glow coming from the corner where the Christmas tree would have stood in the photograph. I stepped inside. The music stopped. I stood there in the silence, my heart slamming against my ribs, and reached for the light switch. My fingers found it. The overhead light flickered on. The room was empty. No piano, no music box. Just furniture covered in sheets and dust thick enough to show that no one had been in here for months. But in the corner, near the window, there were marks in the dust on the floor. Footprints, small, like a child's, leading from the doorway to the center of the room, then stopping. I ran back upstairs, grabbed the photograph, and turned it over. The blurred figure was gone. I searched the image, my eyes darting over every face, every shadow, every corner of that parlor from 1891. The family stood frozen in their poses, smiling stiffly at the camera. But the figure that had been moving closer to them, day by day, was no longer there. I heard a sound behind me, a faint creak like weight settling on old floorboards. I turned. There was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, the dim light from the bedroom, the silence pressing in. But I could feel it. I could feel something watching me. Something that had been inside that photograph for more than a century and was not inside it anymore. I smelled it then. Decay. Not the musty smell of an old house, but something organic and rotten, mixed with the sharp green scent of pine needles. Christmas and death wound together. I did not pack. I dropped the photograph, left it lying face down on the floor, and walked out of that house with nothing but my phone and my keys. I got in my car and drove back to Boston without stopping, without looking back, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I called the lawyer the next morning and told him to sell the estate as is, that I did not want anything from it, that he could keep whatever profit came from the sale. He tried to talk me out of it, said the house and contents were worth a significant amount. But I did not care. I told him I would sign whatever he needed me to sign, but I was never going back. He called me 2 weeks later. The house had sold to a couple from New York looking for a vacation property. They loved it. They thought it had character. He said they were planning to spend their first Christmas there next year. I did not tell him what I knew. I did not warn them. What would I even say? That a photograph had moved? That I heard music and smelled death? They would think I was insane. I searched for information about Ophelia after that. I wanted to know why she had stayed in that house for 93 years, why she never left, why my grandmother refused to talk about her. I found an old newspaper article from 1952, an interview with local residents about the history of the town. Ophelia was mentioned. The reporter asked her if she ever felt lonely, living in that big house all by herself. Her answer was 3 words: I am not alone. I found another article from 1984 about a fire that nearly destroyed the house. Ophelia refused to evacuate. Firefighters had to drag her out. When they asked her why she would not leave, she told them, "It will not let me." She died on Christmas Eve. Alone, according to the death certificate. But I do not believe that anymore. I still have the pictures I took on my phone, the ones that show the figure moving through the photograph day by day. I have looked at them exactly once since I left that house. I will never look at them again, but I will never delete them either. They are proof that I am not crazy. Proof that something was in that photograph. Something that Ophelia spent her entire life trapped with. And proof that I let it out. The new owners sent the lawyer a thank you card last Christmas. He forwarded it to me, thinking I might want to see that the house had gone to a good home. The card had a photo on the front. The couple, smiling, standing in front of the fireplace in the parlor. Behind them, on the mantel, I could see the edge of a wooden frame. They had found the photograph. They had put it back up. I wanted to call them. I wanted to warn them. But what would I say that would not sound like the ramblings of someone who had lost their mind? And maybe I am wrong. Maybe it was all stress and isolation and an overactive imagination. Maybe that figure is still gone, dissolved into whatever shadows it came from. But I do not think so. I think it waited in that house for more than a century, moving through that photograph 1 inch at a time, year after year, until someone finally let it out. I think Ophelia knew. I think that is why she never left, why she spent 93 Christmases in that house, keeping watch, keeping it contained. And I think it has found new people to stand behind now, new faces to move toward, one day at a time, while they hang stockings and trim the tree and never notice the figure getting closer in the photograph on their mantle. I hope I'm wrong. But every Christmas Eve, at exactly 3 in the morning, my phone buzzes with a notification. No message, no caller. Just a push alert that wakes me from whatever restless sleep I have managed to find. And when I unlock the screen, just for a second before it goes dark again, I see an image I did not take. A photograph I did not save. It is me, standing in my apartment, and behind me, blurred and out of focus, there is something else. My boyfriend Miles and I thought a remote Christmas getaway sounded romantic, the kind of thing you see in movies where couples reconnect away from the noise of the world. We had been together for 2 years, and things had gotten stale in that way relationships do when you stop trying. We worked too much. We scrolled through our phones instead of talking. We needed something to shake us out of the routine, and a week in the mountains before Christmas seemed like the perfect solution. Miles found the listing online. A restored lodge deep in the Appalachian wilderness. No neighbors for miles. Nothing but forest and silence. The photos showed exposed beams, a stone fireplace, wide windows looking out over snow-covered pines. It looked like a postcard. The price was almost too good to be true. The owner, an older man with a gray beard and tired eyes, met us at a gas station off the main highway to hand over the keys. He did not say much, just gave us directions and a warning that cell service disappeared about 5 miles up the mountain road. Then, right before he got back in his truck, he turned and said something I thought was a joke at the time. Stay inside after dark on the 21st, winter solstice. The locals take it seriously up here. Miles laughed and said we would keep that in mind. I smiled and nodded, but something about the way the man said it, flat and matter of fact, made my stomach tighten. He did not smile back. He just drove away, leaving us standing in the parking lot with a keyring and a hand-drawn map. The first few days were perfect. We hiked through the woods, made fires in the evenings, cooked simple meals, and talked more than we had in months. The lodge was beautiful, all wood and warmth, and the silence was so complete it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. On the 3rd day, we went on a longer hike, following a trail that wound up through dense forest. That was when we found the symbols. They were carved into the trees, deep cuts that had scarred over with age. Circles, spirals, shapes that looked almost like letters but were not any alphabet I recognized. There were dozens of them, scattered along the trail, some fresh enough that sap still bled from the cuts. Miles thought they were fascinating. He took pictures, zoomed in on the details, talked about how it was probably some kind of folk art. I wanted to turn back. Something about those symbols felt wrong, like a warning we were ignoring. We kept hiking. We found more symbols the further we went, and then we found the clearing. It was a perfect circle, maybe 50 feet across, ringed by stones that had been placed deliberately, evenly spaced. In the center was a post driven into the ground, charred black, with bits of rope still tied around it. The ground was packed dirt, no snow, no grass, nothing growing. It looked like a place where things had been burned. Miles wanted to explore. I wanted to leave. We compromised by staying only a few minutes, long enough for him to take more pictures, and then we hiked back to the lodge. That night, I could not shake the image of that clearing, the way it felt empty and full at the same time, like something invisible was standing there, watching us. December 21st arrived faster than I expected. Winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. Miles had forgotten the owner's warning entirely, but I had not. I kept thinking about it as the afternoon faded into evening, as the light outside turned gray and then black. By 6, it was fully dark. By 7, I was standing at the window, looking out into the forest, feeling like something was about to happen. That was when we heard the chanting. It started faint, so faint I thought I was imagining it. A low, rhythmic sound carried on the wind. Miles heard it too. He got up from the couch and joined me at the window, his face pressed close to the glass. The sound grew louder. Voices, dozens of them, moving through the trees. Then we saw the lights, torches, a long line of them, winding through the forest like a glowing snake. The flames reflected off the snow, turning the woods orange and red. We watched as the procession moved closer, and I realized they were heading toward the clearing we had found. Miles grabbed his phone to record, but the screen would not turn on. Dead, completely drained, even though it had been at 70% an hour ago. Mine was the same. No power, no signal. No way to call anyone or document what we were seeing. The figures reached the clearing. We could see them now, at least their shapes. Dark silhouettes in robes with hoods that hid their faces. They formed a circle around the stones, their torches held high, and the chanting grew louder. Words I did not recognize in a rhythm that made my teeth ache. One of them stepped into the center and placed something on the post, something with antlers, a deer skull crowned with bone. Miles whispered that we should go closer, that we could see better from the ridge. I told him absolutely not, that we needed to lock the doors and stay inside. He argued. He said it was probably just some local tradition, some harmless solstice celebration, and we were being paranoid. I told him the owner warned us. I told him those symbols in the woods were not for decoration. We were still arguing when the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was the kind of silence that meant something had hurt us. The figures in the clearing stood frozen, their torches flickering, and then, as one, they turned toward the lodge. I grabbed Miles by the arm and pulled him away from the window. I do not know if they saw us, but I was not going to wait to find out. We moved through the lodge, turning off every light, pulling every curtain, locking every door and window. The chanting started again, but this time it was closer, much closer. They were coming toward the house. I could hear footsteps now. The crunch of boots on snow, the murmur of voices speaking in that strange rhythm. Miles was breathing hard, his face pale, all his curiosity gone. We crouched in the kitchen, away from the windows, and listened as the sounds surrounded the lodge. They were everywhere, circling us. Then I heard my name, not shouted, whispered, dozens of voices, all saying my name in unison, drawn out and wrong like they were tasting it. Miles heard it too. He looked at me, his eyes wide and mouthed, "How do they know?" I did not have an answer. We had not told anyone in town our names. We had barely spoken to anyone except the owner. But they knew. They were calling me, over and over, a chant within a chant. The footsteps stopped at the doors, at the windows. I could hear something scraping against the wood, a soft, dragging sound, deliberate and slow. Then something hit the door. Not a knock, but a thud, like someone had leaned their full weight against it. The hinges creaked. Miles started to cry. I held his hand and tried not to make a sound. The scraping continued for hours. The chanting never stopped. At some point, I realized they were placing things against the house, objects I could hear but not see, dragging them across the porch, stacking them against the walls. The smell of smoke began to seep through the cracks. Not wood smoke, but something organic, something that made my eyes water. I do not remember when I fell asleep. Exhaustion took over, or maybe my mind just shut down to protect itself. When I opened my eyes again, it was dawn. The gray light of morning filtered through gaps in the curtains. The house was silent. Miles was already awake, sitting with his back against the kitchen cabinets, staring at nothing. Neither of us spoke. We waited another hour, listening before we finally worked up the courage to look outside. The clearing was empty. The torches were gone. But the lodge was surrounded. They had built structures against every door and window, woven frames made from branches and bone, tied together with dried grass and sinew. Symbols were scratched into the wood siding, the same symbols we had seen in the forest, covering every surface. And hanging from the eaves, swaying slightly in the breeze, were bundles of holly and bone, twisted into shapes that looked almost like dolls. Our truck tires had been slashed, all 4 of them, cut so deeply the rims had sunk into the gravel. We did not talk about what to do. We just started walking. 8 miles down the mountain road, stumbling through snow, jumping at every sound. The sun was high by the time we reached the gas station. The owner was there, sitting behind the counter, and when he saw us, he did not look surprised. "You stayed inside, did not you?" he said. I nodded. Miles could not speak. "Good," the owner said. "That is why you are still here." He drove us back to town without another word. We got a tow truck for the vehicle, paid for new tires, and left that same day. Never asked the owner what would have happened if we had gone outside. I never asked what the symbols meant or who those people were. I did not want to know. Miles and I broke up 3 months later. We never talked about that night, not once. But it sat between us like a wall. Some things are too heavy to carry together. I still think about the way they knew my name. I still hear it sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, a whisper just at the edge of hearing. I tell myself it is my imagination. I tell myself we were lucky. But every year on the winter solstice, I make sure every door is locked and every light is on. And I do not look out the windows after dark. I took a seasonal job as an elf at the mall in December 2012, desperate for money to cover spring semester tuition. I was 19, a sophomore at the community college, and naive enough to think a job where I wore a green velvet costume and handed out candy canes would be harmless. The mall was one of those upscale outdoor shopping centers where everything cost too much, and families came to take pictures with Santa like it was a sacred tradition. They paid $12 an hour, which was good money back then, and the manager promised it would be easy work. She was right about the easy part. What she did not mention was the Santa. His name was Jonathan, and he was beloved. Families requested him by name. The mall had used him for 15 consecutive years, and management treated him like royalty. He had his own dressing room, his own reserved parking spot, and a contract that apparently gave him approval over which elves he worked with. He was in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with real white hair and a real white beard. He did not need much padding. When he put on the red suit, he looked exactly like the Santa from every Christmas movie, right down to the twinkle in his blue eyes. Parents loved him. Kids loved him. The other mall employees spoke about him with reverence, like he was doing something noble instead of sitting in a chair for 8 hours asking children what they wanted for Christmas. I hated him from the first shift. It started small. A hand on my lower back that lingered too long when he guided me into position for photos. Comments about how the elf costume fit me, how I looked just darling, how I was his prettiest helper yet. He stood too close when he talked to me, his breath warm on my neck, his voice dropping to a whisper that parents waiting in line could not hear. I told myself I was overreacting. He was a grandfather, a mall fixture, a man everyone trusted. I was just a broke college kid who needed the job. The other elves were 2 girls, both in their early 20s, and they barely spoke to me. When I tried to make conversation during our breaks, they would mumble something polite and walk away. I thought maybe they did not like me, that I had done something wrong. It took me a week to realize they were afraid, not of me, of him. One afternoon, the mall was slow. Families had thinned out after lunch, and we had a gap in the schedule. Jonathan told the other 2 elves they could take their breaks early. They left fast, almost running toward the food court. And suddenly, I was alone with him in the Santa workshop set. He smiled at me, that warm, grandfatherly smile, and said we should use the time to organize the prop area in the back. The prop area was a storage room behind the fake North Pole backdrop, filled with boxes of ornaments, extra candy canes, and rolls of wrapping paper. It was small and windowless, lit by a single overhead bulb. I did not want to go in there with him, but I could not think of a reason to say no that would not sound ridiculous. So I followed him. He closed the door behind us. The click of the latch made my stomach drop. I turned to look at him, and his expression had changed. The twinkle was gone. He was not smiling anymore. He just stared at me with his calm, appraising look, like he was deciding something. "You are a hard worker," he said. "I appreciate that." I mumbled a thank you and started moving boxes, trying to look busy, trying to fill the silence. "I have been doing this a long time," he continued. 15 years. Every year I pick one special elf, someone who really understands the magic of Christmas. My hands were shaking. I set down the box I was holding and turned toward the door. "I need to check on the line," I said. He stepped between me and the exit. "There is no line," he said. "I sent them away, remember?" He was close now, close enough that I could smell the peppermint on his breath and the stale sweat under his costume. He reached out and touched my hair, tucking a strand behind my ear. "You are special," he said. "I knew it the first day. You have that look, innocent, trusting, just like Emily, and Rachel before her, and the girl before that. I do not even remember her name." I felt the room tilt. He was telling me something, confessing, and he did not care that I could hear it because he did not think it mattered. He did not think I would do anything about it. "I have been doing this for 15 years, he said again, his voice soft and proud. "No one has ever said a word. Do you know why?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "Because I am Santa," he said, smiling now. "I bring in $50,000 in photo revenue every season. I am the reason families come to this mall instead of the one across town. Management knows that. They protect me. So even if you tried to say something, even if you ran out there right now and screamed, no one would believe you. I am a grandfather. I volunteer at the children's hospital. I have awards." He leaned closer, his hand sliding to my shoulder. "So, why do we not just make this easy?" he said. You are my special elf this year. That is an honor. Other girls have understood that. I do not know what I would have done if my body had not reacted on its own. The fear hit me so hard and so fast that my stomach twisted, and before I could stop it, I vomited. Not politely, not a little bit. I bent over and threw up everything I had eaten that day, right onto his black boots. He jumped back, cursing, his face twisted in disgust. The spell broke. He was not calm anymore. He was angry, furious, yelling about how disgusting I was, how I had ruined his costume. He unlocked the door and shoved it open, shouting for someone to bring him towels. I ran. I did not grab my coat. I did not clock out. I ran through the mall, still in my elf costume, and I did not stop until I was in my car with the doors locked. I tried to report him. I went to mall management the next day, told them everything he had said, everything he had implied. The manager listened with a tight smile and then told me Jonathan had already filed a complaint about me. He said I had made inappropriate advances toward him and that he had to reject me, which was why I got sick. Stress, he called it, embarrassment. They fired me. They said my behavior was unprofessional and that I was clearly not a good fit for a family-friendly environment. Jonathan stayed. He finished out the season. He came back the next year and the year after that. I started looking for the other girls. Emily, Rachel, the one whose name he could not remember. I found them through social media, through old employee directories, through sheer stubborn determination. It took me 6 months, but I found 8 of them. 8 girls over 10 years, all with the same story. All told they were lying, all dismissed because Jonathan was Santa, and Santa does not do things like that. We reported him together. 8 statements, all consistent, all detailed. The local news picked it up. The mall could not ignore it anymore, not with that much attention. They let him go. Quietly, no charges, no arrest. Just a termination and a settlement offer if we signed non-disclosure agreements. Most of the girls signed. They wanted it to be over. I did not. I refused the money, and I told anyone who would listen what had happened. The mall threatened to sue me for defamation. They said I was damaging their reputation. I told them to go ahead. They never did. Jonathan disappeared after that. I do not know where he went. I do not know if he found another mall, another Santa gig, another set of elves to choose from. I hope he did not. I hope someone else recognized the look in his eyes and stopped him before he could start again. But I do not believe that. Men like Jonathan do not stop. They just move. Every December, I see mall Santas, and I wonder. I see the elves standing beside them, young girls in green velvet and striped tights, smiling for the cameras. I wonder if they feel that hand on their back that lingers too long. I wonder if they hear comments whispered just low enough that no one else can hear. I wonder if they are told they are special. And I wonder how many of them will report it, and how many will be told that no one will believe them because the man in the red suit is a grandfather, a volunteer, an institution. Because he is Santa, and Santa does not do things like that. I do not celebrate Christmas anymore. I have not since 2012. People ask me why, and I tell them I am just not in the spirit. They nod and say they understand that the holidays can be hard. They think I am talking about loneliness or family drama or something normal. I let them think that. It is easier than explaining that I cannot walk past a mall Santa without my hands shaking, that I cannot hear jingle bells without feeling sick, that I spent my 19th Christmas learning that the people we trust to protect children are often the same people who hurt them, and that no one wants to believe it because it ruins the magic. Jonathan took that from me. Not just the holiday, but the belief that someone would listen, that the truth mattered more than tradition, that being right was enough. I got none of those things. What I got was a lesson about power, about who gets believed and who gets erased, about how a red suit and a white beard can be better armor than any lie. I hope the other girls are okay. I hope they found a way to move past it that I have not. I hope Jonathan is alone somewhere, forgotten, powerless. But every year when December comes and the mall decorations go up and I see those photos of smiling children on Santa's lap, I think about the girl standing just off camera in the green velvet dress, and I wonder if she is okay. I wonder if anyone has asked her. I wonder if anyone would believe her if she said she was not. Our office Christmas party in 2017 had a secret Santa exchange, one of those mandatory fun activities that everyone pretends to enjoy, but secretly resents. I was 26, working at a mid-sized marketing firm in Philadelphia, and I had been there just over a year. Long enough to know most people's names, but not long enough to really know anyone. The party was at a rented event space downtown, open bar, catered food, the whole corporate celebration package. We were supposed to bring our secret Santa gifts wrapped and place them under the tree by 8. The exchange would happen at 9, right before the speeches and awards. I had drawn Eleanor's name. She worked in accounts, a quiet woman in her early 30s who kept to herself. I had maybe spoken to her 3 times in the entire year, short conversations about deadlines or meeting rooms, nothing personal. I did not know what she liked, so I bought her a candle from one of those expensive stores, something that smelled like vanilla and came in a glass jar with a ribbon. Safe, impersonal, exactly what you give to someone you do not know. I placed my gift under the tree when I arrived, grabbed a drink and tried to blend into the background while my co-workers got progressively louder and drunker. At 9, our boss gathered everyone around for the exchange. We had done a number system. Everyone drew a number from a hat. And when your number was called, you picked a gift from under the tree. I was number 14. I waited through the first 13 people, watching them unwrap wine bottles and gift cards and those desk toys that are supposed to relieve stress. When my number was called, I walked to the tree and grabbed a medium-sized box wrapped in red paper with a silver bow. It was heavier than I expected. I brought it back to my spot, and everyone watched as I tore off the wrapping. Inside was a scrapbook. The cover was plain black leather, no title, no decoration. I opened it, expecting maybe some kind of office joke, a collection of memes or printouts from company emails. What I found instead made my hands go numb. The first page had a photo of me. Not a photo someone had taken at work or pulled from social media. A candid shot taken from a distance of me sitting in a coffee shop. I was looking down at my phone, unaware of the camera. I did not recognize the coffee shop at first, and then I did. It was the place 2 blocks from my apartment, the one I went to every Saturday morning. I turned the page. Another photo. Me leaving my building, wearing my gym clothes, headphones in. Another page. Me at the grocery store, reaching for something on a shelf. Another. Me on a date sitting across from someone at a restaurant, laughing. My heart started pounding. I flipped through the book faster. There were dozens of photos. Me walking my neighbor's dog. Me getting my mail. Me sitting on a bench in the park. Me through my apartment window, visible from the street, washing dishes, in my kitchen. Every photo had a caption written beneath it in neat handwriting. Dates, times, notes about what I was wearing, where I was going, who I was with. 7:42 a.m., coffee shop, black sweater, looked tired. 3:15 p.m., grocery store, bought wine, must be expecting someone. 9:30 p.m., kitchen, hair down, beautiful. Someone had been following me for months, taking pictures, writing notes, documenting my life. I looked up from the scrapbook, my vision blurring. The room had gone quiet. People were staring. Someone asked if I was okay. I could not answer. I held up the book, my hands shaking, and someone took it from me. I heard gasps, murmurs, the sound of pages turning. "What the hell is this?" someone said. Our HR director took the book, her face going pale as she flipped through it. She looked at me, then at the tree, then at the room full of people. "Who made this?" she said, her voice sharp. "This is not funny. Whoever did this needs to speak up right now." No one moved. No one said anything. The HR director checked the gift tag still attached to the wrapping paper. There was no name, just my number written in marker. She went to the sign-up sheet, the one where we had all written down who we drew for Secret Santa. My name was next to number 14. The person assigned to buy my gift was Eleanor. Every head in the room turned toward her. Eleanor was standing near the back, her face white, her eyes wide. She shook her head. "That was not me," she said. "I gave you a candle. I bought you a vanilla candle. I do not know what that is." "You were assigned to her," the HR director said. "I know," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "But I did not make that, I swear. I brought a candle. I put it under the tree this morning." Someone suggested checking the tree for another gift. We searched. There was no candle, no other gift with my number, just the scrapbook. Eleanor excused herself to the bathroom. She was gone for a long time, long enough that someone went to check on her. When they came back, they said Eleanor was sitting on the floor, crying, refusing to come out. I called the police. They came. They took the scrapbook. They interviewed everyone at the party. No one admitted to making it. No one had seen anyone place it under the tree. The event space had cameras, but they only covered the entrance, not the room where the tree was. The footage showed all of us arriving, placing gifts, mingling. Nothing unusual. They asked Eleanor to come down to the station. She agreed. She let them search her car. In the trunk, they found a camera with a telephoto lens. On the memory card were more photos, hundreds of them. Me at the coffee shop, me at the gym, me in my apartment, visible through the gaps in my blinds. Photos I had not seen in the scrapbook, photos that were even more invasive, closer, more intimate. Eleanor broke down. She admitted she had been following me, not since I started at the company, but since before. Since I interviewed. She said she saw me in the lobby that day, waiting to meet with HR, and she could not stop thinking about me. She said she just wanted to be close to me, to understand me, to be part of my life. She said she had never meant to scare me. The police asked if she had ever been inside my apartment. She hesitated. Then she nodded. "Twice," she said. "Just twice." She had taken my spare key from my gym bag one day at work, made a copy, and returned it before I noticed. She said she only went in when I was not home. She said she never took anything. She just wanted to see where I lived, to lie on my bed, to feel close to me. I felt like I was going to be sick. They arrested her, stalking, breaking, and entering. The company fired her the next day. I got a restraining order. She moved out of state a month later as part of her plea agreement. I never saw her again, but the damage was done. I moved 3 times in the next year. Every apartment I found, I would stay for a few months and then start to feel like I was being watched again. A shadow at the window. Footsteps in the hallway that stopped outside my door. The sense that someone had been in my space while I was gone, even though nothing was missing, even though the locks had not been tampered with. I checked my credit report obsessively. I changed my phone number. I deleted all my social media. I installed cameras. I bought new locks. I did everything the police told me to do. And still, I could not shake the feeling that she was out there, watching. The worst part was not knowing how long it had been happening before I found out. Months, at least. Maybe longer. How many times had she been in my apartment while I slept? How many times had she stood outside my window watching me move through my own life, unaware that I was performing for an audience of one? I started checking every gift I received. Christmas, birthdays, anything. I would unwrap them slowly, carefully, looking for signs that they were not what they seemed. My friends thought I was paranoid. Maybe I was, but I could not help it. Eleanor sent me a letter from wherever she moved to. It arrived 2 Christmases after the incident. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in the Midwest. I almost threw it away without reading it. I wish I had. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had been getting help, that she understood now that what she did was wrong. But then, at the end, she wrote something that made my blood run cold. I still think about you every day. I still miss being close to you. I hope you are doing well. I hope you are happy. I hope you know that someone out there cares about you more than you will ever understand. I burned the letter. I reported it to the police, but there was nothing they could do. She had not threatened me. She had not violated the restraining order. She had just sent a letter. I have not celebrated Christmas since. I do not go to office parties. I do not do Secret Santa. When December rolls around and my co-workers start talking about holiday plans, I make excuses. I say I am busy. I say I have family obligations. I do not tell them the truth. The truth is that every time I see wrapped presents under a tree, I think about that scrapbook. I think about Eleanor sitting in her car outside my apartment, camera in hand, waiting for me to walk past a window. I think about her lying in my bed, in my space, breathing in the smell of my pillows. I think about how many months she watched me before I knew. I think about how close she got before anyone noticed. And I think about the fact that she is still out there, somewhere, thinking about me every day. Christmas is supposed to be about giving, about surprises, about the joy of receiving something from someone who cares about you. I learned that gifts can be weapons, that surprises can be violations, that someone caring about you without your consent is not love. It is terror wrapped in ribbon, wrapped in. On Christmas morning, 2009, every radio in our house started playing the same thing, and to this day, no one has been able to explain it. I was 16 years old, living with my parents and 2 younger sisters in a suburb outside of Richmond, Virginia. We were a normal family. We went to church sometimes. We argued about chores. We had traditions. Christmas morning was one of them. We always woke up early, made cinnamon rolls, and opened presents in the living room while our father took pictures and our mother pretended not to cry over sentimental gifts. That year, we started around 8 in the morning. The tree was lit, the room smelled like sugar and pine, and wrapping paper was already piling up on the floor. My younger sister had just opened a jewelry box and was holding it up for our mother to see. My father was adjusting the camera settings. I was tearing the paper off a box that I hoped contained the boots I had been asking for since October. It was one of those perfect moments, the kind you see in commercials, warm and safe and completely ordinary. Then every radio in the house turned on at once. The kitchen radio, the alarm clocks in the bedrooms upstairs, the old boombox in the basement, my father's workshop radio in the garage. All of them simultaneously, broadcasting the same thing, not music, not static, a voice. It was a man's voice, deep and calm, with an odd accent I could not place. Southern, maybe, but not quite. Old-fashioned in the way he pronounced certain words, formal and careful. And he was talking about us. "Merry Christmas to the Harrison family," the voice said. "I hope you are enjoying your morning. I see the youngest has received the jewelry box. The pearls inside belonged to her great-grandmother, did they not?" My father dropped the camera. My mother stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee. We all looked at each other, frozen, listening. "And the middle child," the voice continued, "is hoping for boots. Black leather, size 7. They are in the box she's holding. I think she will be pleased." I looked down at the box in my lap. I had not opened it yet. I tore off the rest of the paper with shaking hands. Inside were the boots. Black leather, size 7. "The father is worried the camera batteries will die before he finishes taking pictures," the voice said. "They will not. He charged them last night, though he does not remember doing it." My father ran to the kitchen. We heard him yank the plug out of the wall. The radio kept playing. "That will not help," the voice said, almost gently. "I am not coming from the outlet." My mother grabbed the cordless phone and started dialing 911. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to try twice. She held the phone to her ear and waited. Nothing. No dial tone, no ringing. Just silence. "The phone lines are fine," the voice said. "But I would prefer you not call anyone just yet. I only have a little time, and I have been waiting so long to speak with you." My youngest sister started to cry. My mother pulled her close, wrapping her arms around her like she could shield her from the voice. My father came back into the room, his face pale, holding the kitchen radio. It was unplugged, the cord dangling, but the voice was still coming from the speaker. "How is this happening?" my father said, his voice cracking. "I have been here a very long time," the voice answered, as if it had heard him. "Watching, listening. I know this house better than you do. I know the creak in the floorboard outside the master bedroom. I know the loose tile in the upstairs bathroom. I know the way the light comes through the kitchen window at dawn." My father set the radio down on the coffee table and backed away from it. We all stared at it, this ordinary object that had become something impossible. "I know about the dog," the voice continued, and my mother made a small choking sound. "The golden retriever you had when you first moved in, Bailey. She died 3 years ago this past November. Cancer. You buried her in the backyard under the oak tree. The youngest still visits the spot sometimes." My sister was sobbing now. That part was true, all of it was true. "I miss her too," the voice said, and there was something in the tone, something almost sad. "She used to sleep in the hallway at night. I would watch her dream." "Who are you?" my father shouted at the radio. "What do you want?" There was a pause, a crackle of static, and then the voice came back, quieter this time. "I do not know anymore," it said. "I have been here so long that I have forgotten. I think I was someone once. I think I lived in this house, or maybe I died in it. The details are gone. But I remember Christmas. I remember the feeling of it, the warmth, the family. I do not have that anymore. So I borrow yours." "You have been watching us?" my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every year," the voice said. "Every Christmas morning. I watch you open your gifts. I listen to you laugh. I remember what it was like to be part of something. Just for a little while, I am not alone." My skin was crawling. The idea that something had been in our house, watching us, for years, and we had never known, made me feel sick. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. I do not know why I asked. I do not know if I wanted an answer. The voice paused again, longer this time, as if it was thinking. "Closer than you think," it finally said. "Further than you would believe." The room felt colder. I pulled my knees to my chest, suddenly aware of every shadow, every corner, every space where something could be hiding. "I do not mean to frighten you," the voice said. "I know that I do. I know that this is wrong, but it is the only thing I have left. One morning a year, I let myself be part of your family. I let myself pretend that I belong. You need to leave," my father said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "You need to leave us alone." "I will," the voice said. "I always do. When the time comes, I will go back to wherever I go, and I will wait another year. But before I leave, I want to say thank you. Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for the memories." "We did not let you," my mother said, anger breaking through the fear. "We did not invite you. We do not want you here." The voice did not respond to that. Instead, it said something that made my blood turn to ice. "Merry Christmas, Harrison family. I will see you next year." And then, at exactly 8:34 in the morning, every radio in the house went silent. Not off. Silent, the static returned, the hum of electricity. And then, one by one, they switched back to their normal stations. Christmas music, news, weather reports. We sat there for a long time, not moving, not speaking. Finally, my father got up and checked every radio in the house. They were all functioning normally. He called the phone company. The lines were fine. He called the police. They came, took a report, asked questions we could not answer. They checked for signs of a break-in. There were none. They suggested it might have been some kind of pirate radio signal, a prank, a hacker. But they could not explain how it had come through radios that were not plugged in. They could not explain how the voice knew details about our family that no one outside our house could have known. We never found an explanation. We had the house blessed by a priest. We replaced all the radios. We did everything we could think of to make ourselves feel safe again. But every Christmas morning since, we gather in the living room at 8, and we go quiet. We do not open presents. We do not turn on the radios. We just sit and wait, listening to the silence, waiting to hear if Hugh comes back. He never has. But I think about him. I think about what he said about being alone, about borrowing our family for one morning a year because it was the only thing he had left. I think about the fact that someone has been in our house for years, maybe decades, watching us live our lives, and we never knew. I think about the way he knew Bailey's name, the way he knew where she was buried, the way he said he missed her too. I moved out when I turned 21. I live 3 states away now. I have my own apartment, my own life, my own traditions. But every Christmas morning, I unplug every radio in my home. I turn off my phone. I sit in the silence and I listen. I have never heard his voice again. But sometimes, when the house is very quiet, I feel like I am not alone. Like something is watching me, not with malice, but with longing. Like something is borrowing my morning, my warmth, that's my life, because it has nothing else. I do not know if that makes it better or worse. I do not know if Hugh is still in my parents' house, waiting for another Christmas, or if he has moved on to somewhere else. I do not know if he is a ghost or something stranger, something that exists in the spaces between radio waves and memory. All I know is that every year, my parents call me on December 25th, and the first thing they say is, "He did not come back." And every year, I do not know if I am relieved or sad, because part of me wonders what it would be like to be so alone that the only connection you have to the world is one morning a year, listening to a family that does not know you exist. Part of me wonders if that is not haunting. It is just loneliness. bought a vintage snow globe at an estate sale 3 days before Christmas 2020. And I've spent every day since then wondering if I actually made it back out. The sale was in an old neighborhood in Baltimore, one of those streets where the row houses lean slightly toward each other like they are sharing secrets. The house belonged to a woman named Rosalie, who had died alone on Christmas Eve the year before. Her relatives were selling everything, furniture and dishes, and decades of accumulated belongings, all laid out on tables in rooms that still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I collect vintage Christmas items, ornaments, postcards, anything with that particular quality of old holidays, when decorations were made of glass and paper instead of plastic. I was looking through a box of tree toppers when I saw the snow globe sitting on a side table, half hidden behind a stack of books. It was beautiful. The base was carved wood, dark and heavy with details that had been worn smooth by years of handling. Inside the glass dome was a Victorian parlor scene, a family gathered around a Christmas tree. The figures were incredibly detailed, painted with care, their faces tiny but distinct. A father, a mother, 4 children in old-fashioned clothing. The tree was decorated with miniature ornaments, no bigger than pinheads. Snow was suspended in the liquid, real flakes, not the plastic glitter you see in modern globes. I asked the woman running the sale how much she wanted for it. She looked at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That belonged to Rosalie," she said. It was the only thing she kept on display year-round. She never packed it away with the other decorations. "It is beautiful," I said. "She was not," the woman said. "Beautiful, I mean, or happy. I am her niece, and I only saw her smile once in my entire life, at my wedding. And even then, it looked like it hurt her." I did not know what to say to that, so I just waited. $10, the woman finally said. "Take it. I do not want it in my house." I paid and wrapped the globe carefully in newspaper. I brought it home and set it on the mantel in my living room, next to the garland and the candles. It looked perfect there, like it had always belonged. That night, I shook it. I do not know why. It is what you do with snow globes. You shake them and watch the snow fall. But the moment I tilted it, I heard something. A sound, faint and high-pitched. That might have been the liquid sloshing inside, or might have been something else. Something that sounded like screaming. I set the globe down fast, my heart pounding. I told myself it was water pressure, air trapped in the glass, something logical. But when I looked at the scene inside, the figures seemed different. The mother, who had been facing the tree, now seemed to be turned slightly toward the glass. Her mouth, a tiny painted dot, looked open. I did not shake it again that night. The next morning, I picked it up to examine it in better light. The figure had moved. I was sure of it. She was facing the glass now, fully turned away from the tree, and one of the children, the smallest one, was also turned. Both of them seemed to be looking out, their tiny faces pressed close to the inside of the dome. I took a picture with my phone. I do not know why. Maybe I thought I was going crazy and wanted proof. Maybe I just needed to document it. I set the globe back on the mantel and tried to ignore it. But I could not. Every time I walked past, I felt drawn to it. I would stop and stare, trying to see if the figures had moved again, trying to convince myself that I was imagining it. And every day, I would shake it. Just once, just to see. By the third day, all the figures were facing outward. All of them were pressed against the glass, their painted faces distorted by the curve of the dome, their mouths open in silent screams. I stopped sleeping. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those tiny figures, trapped in their frozen moment, trying to get out. I became obsessed with the globe. I would sit in front of it for hours, shaking it over and over, counting the times. I do not know why I counted. It felt important. It felt like there was a number I was supposed to reach. 100? I had to shake it 100 times. I do not remember deciding that. It just became true, the way facts are true. I shook it in the morning. I shook it at night. I shook it during meals, during showers, carrying it from room to room because I could not stand to be away from it. On Christmas Eve, I reached 100. I shook the globe one last time, and the glass cracked. Not shattered, just a single thin line running from the base to the top of the dome. Liquid began to seep out, slowly at first, then faster, pooling on the mantel and dripping onto the floor. I tried to catch it, to stop it, but my hands would not work right. Everything felt slow and distant, like I was watching myself from far away. The room tilted, the lights dimmed, and then everything went black. I woke up on Christmas morning. I was lying on the couch in my living room. Sunlight was coming through the windows. The snow globe was on the mantel, intact. No crack, no water. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed the whole thing. A stress hallucination. Too much time alone during the pandemic. I sat up, my head pounding, and looked around. Everything was wrong. Not obviously wrong, just slightly off. The furniture was the same, but smaller, like I was seeing it from a strange angle. The colors were too bright, too saturated. The air felt thick, viscous, like I was moving through liquid instead of space. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, I could see my street, my neighbor's house, the tree in the front yard. But I could not hear anything. No cars, no birds, no sound at all. I turned back to the living room and saw myself. I was sitting on the couch, holding the snow globe, shaking it slowly. My face was slack, my eyes unfocused. I looked like I was sleeping with my eyes open. I tried to call out, to scream, but no sound came. I ran to the couch, tried to grab my own shoulder, but my hand passed through. I was not there. Or I was there, but not in the right way. I looked at the snow globe in my hands, the version of me that was still solid, still real. And inside the dome, I saw the Victorian family. But there was a new figure now, standing at the edge of the scene, out of place in modern clothing. It was me. I was inside the snow globe. I blinked, and I was back in my body. Solid, real, sitting on the couch with the globe in my lap. My hands were shaking. I looked at the scene inside. The new figure was still there. A tiny version of myself, painted in miniature, standing among the Victorians. My mouth was open. My hands were pressed against the glass. I threw the globe across the room. It hit the wall but did not break. It rolled across the floor and stopped at my feet, as if it was asking to be picked up again. I did not pick it up. I grabbed a trash bag, shoved the globe inside, and took it out to the alley behind my building. I threw it in the dumpster and went back inside. I locked the door. I turned on every light. I tried to convince myself it was over. 3 days later, the woman from the estate sale called me. I do not know how she got my number. I had paid cash. "Do you still have the snow globe?" she asked. "No," I said. "I threw it away." There was a long pause. "That is a shame," she said. "I have another buyer, someone who wants it very badly. She says there is a way out if you are willing to let someone else take your place." I hung up. I did not ask who the other buyer was. I did not ask how she knew. I burned the trash bag before the garbage truck could take it. I watched the flames consume the globe, watched the glass crack and melt, watched the tiny figures inside blacken and curl. But sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection wrong. In a window, in a mirror, on the black screen of my phone. And it looks like I'm seeing myself through curved glass, distorted and distant. And I wonder if I really made it out. I wonder if the version of me that burned the globe was the real one. Or if I am still inside, trapped in a scene that never changes, shaking the glass from the inside, while another version of myself moves through the world, wearing my face. I wonder if Rosalie felt this way for 93 years, wondering which side of the glass she was really on. The woman from the estate sale said Rosalie never smiled, that she looked like smiling hurt her. I understand that now, because I do not smile anymore either. Every time I try, it feels like my face is made of painted porcelain, like if I move too quickly, I will crack. I moved apartments twice since then. I do not collect vintage Christmas items anymore. I do not celebrate the holiday at all. And I never, ever shake snow globes. But every Christmas Eve, I stand in front of a mirror and I look at my reflection, searching for proof that I am real, that I am on the right side of the glass. And every year, I am a little less sure. Because the thing about being trapped is that you do not always know when it happens. You do not feel the moment you cross from one side to the other. You just wake up one day and realize that the world feels wrong, that you feel wrong, that you have been performing your own life instead of living it. Maybe I made it out. Maybe I am still inside. Maybe there is no difference anymore. All I know is that somewhere in a dumpster or a landfill or another estate sale, there is a snow globe with a tiny figure inside that looks exactly like me. And if someone buys it, if someone takes it home and shakes it 100 times, I wonder what will happen. I wonder if I will finally know which side of the glass I am really on. Or if someone else will take my place and I will be free. But freedom, I have learned, is just another word for forgetting which prison you are in.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you a descent into fear with 8 of the most disturbing true trucker horror stories ever documented. These accounts are not drawn from highway folklore or roadside legends, but from the lived ordeals of professional drivers whose nights on America's interstates became unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Each story takes us deep into isolated highways and shadowed truck stops, revealing chilling encounters that span from unexplained radio transmissions to terrifying confrontations with forces both human and otherworldly. The testimonies have been meticulously preserved from first-hand accounts shared within the trucking community, ensuring that the authenticity of these experiences remains uncompromised, while driver names and specific routes have been altered to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. If you have not yet joined our growing community of horror enthusiasts, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss a single night when the unknown comes calling from the darkness between cities. Be sure to leave a comment below and tell us about your own highway experiences or which story disturbed you the most. I need to tell someone about what happened to me and my partner on a lonely stretch of highway in rural Texas 6 months ago. The authorities classified it as an attempted robbery, but that does not even come close to describing the organized nightmare we stumbled into that night. My name is Christopher, and I have been driving team with my partner Jake for 3 years. We thought we knew how to handle ourselves on the road, thought we understood the dangers that came with hauling valuable cargo through remote areas. We were wrong. It was a Tuesday night in late March, and we were hauling a load of electronics from Houston to Dallas. Nothing unusual about the run, just expensive enough that the company insisted on a team operation for security. Jake was sleeping in the bunk while I took the night shift, driving through the kind of empty Texas countryside where you can go 20 miles without seeing another vehicle. Around 2:45 a.m., I spotted what looked like a car accident about half a mile ahead. Emergency flashers were blinking on the shoulder, and I could see figures waving flashlights trying to flag down traffic. My first instinct was to help. In 15 years of trucking, I had stopped at dozens of accident scenes, pulled people out of burning cars, called for ambulances, done whatever I could to help fellow travelers in distress. But something about this scene felt wrong from the beginning. For one thing, there were too many people. A typical accident might have 2 or 3 individuals involved, maybe a passerby who had stopped to help. But I counted at least 6 figures moving around the disabled vehicle, which appeared to be a sedan tilted at an odd angle on the shoulder. The pattern of their movements was too coordinated, too purposeful for people who were supposedly dealing with an emergency. I slowed down and pulled into the right lane, intending to stop and offer assistance despite my growing unease. That is when I noticed the second red flag. The disabled car's hazard lights were flashing, but I could not see any actual damage. No crumpled fenders, no broken glass glittering on the asphalt. No sign of the impact that should have put the vehicle there. As I brought my rig to a stop about 50 yards from the scene, one of the figures jogged toward my cab. He was a tall man in his 30s, wearing jeans and a work shirt, carrying a flashlight and moving with the kind of confident stride that comes from being in complete control of a situation. "Thank God you stopped," he called as I rolled down my window. "We have got a real bad situation here. Driver is trapped and we need to get this car moved before another vehicle comes around that curve and plows into us." I woke Jake up and filled him in quickly while the man waited by my door. Jake climbed into the driver's seat to get a better look at the scene, and I could see him frowning as he studied the layout. "Something is not right about this," Jake whispered to me. "Look at how those other people are positioned. They are not trying to help with the car. They are watching the road in both directions like they are standing guard." I looked more carefully and realized Jake was absolutely right. The other figures were spread out in a defensive perimeter, some facing north, others south, all of them alert and watching for approaching traffic. It was the kind of formation you might see from a military unit or a well-trained criminal organization. "What kind of help do you need exactly?" I called down to the man by my window. "We need your truck to pull the car back onto the road," he replied smoothly. "Got a tow strap right here. Just take a minute and you will be on your way." That is when I noticed the third red flag. Despite supposedly dealing with a serious accident for God knows how long, none of these people looked stressed or hurried. Their clothes were clean, their movements calm and methodical. The man talking to me was not sweating, was not showing any signs of the adrenaline that comes with a genuine emergency. Jake made the decision for both of us. "We are going to call this in to the state police," he announced loudly enough for the man outside to hear. "They will have a tow truck out here within the hour." The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The man's friendly demeanor dropped away like a mask being removed. "I do not think you understand the situation," he said, his voice now cold and threatening. "We need your cooperation right now." That is when I saw the gun. He had been holding it low against his leg, hidden from view, but now he raised it until the barrel was pointing directly at my chest. At the same moment, the other figures around the disabled car stopped pretending to work on it and turned their attention fully toward our truck. "Driver, you need to shut off that engine and step out of the cab," the gunman ordered. "Both of you, hands where we can see them, no sudden movements." My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst, but years of training kicked in. Every trucking company drills their drivers on what to do in a hijacking situation. Comply with demands. Do not resist. Do not try to be a hero. The cargo is insured. The company would rather lose the load than lose their drivers. But Jake had different ideas. "Hold on tight," he whispered to me, then slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The gunman tried to jump clear as 40 tons of truck and trailer lurched forward, but Jake deliberately swerved toward him. I heard the man scream as he dove for the ditch, and then we were past the fake accident scene and accelerating down the highway. That should have been the end of it, but these people were not giving up easily. As we gained speed, I could see headlights in my mirrors. Multiple vehicles were pursuing us, and they were gaining fast. "These guys are serious," Jake said through gritted teeth, pushing our loaded rig as hard as it would go. "This is not some random robbery, this is organized." The first vehicle caught up with us about 3 miles down the road. It was a pickup truck with 2 men in the cab, and they pulled alongside us on the left. The passenger was leaning out the window with what looked like a rifle, trying to get a clear shot at our tires. Jake swerved hard to the left, using our weight advantage to force the pickup off the road. I watched in the mirror as it spun out and rolled into the ditch, but there were still at least 2 more vehicles behind us. "There!" Jake pointed ahead to a cluster of lights about 5 miles in the distance. "That has got to be a town. If we can make it there, we can get help." The next few minutes were the most terrifying of my life. The remaining pursuit vehicles took turns trying to disable our truck, shooting at our tires, attempting to ram us from behind. Jake drove like a man possessed, using every ounce of his skill to keep us on the road and moving toward those distant lights. We were less than a mile from what we hoped was safety when disaster struck. One of the pursuing cars managed to get alongside us on the right, and I could see the driver gesturing for Jake to pull over. When Jake ignored him, the car suddenly swerved into us, trying to force us off the road. Jake overcorrected, and I felt our trailer start to jackknife. For a moment that seemed to last forever. We were sliding sideways down the highway at 60 miles per hour, the screaming of locked-up brakes filling the air. Then physics took over and our truck rolled. I remember the sensation of being thrown around the cab like a rag doll, the deafening crash of metal and glass, the acrid smell of diesel fuel and burning rubber. When the world finally stopped spinning, I was hanging upside down in my seat, blood running down my face from a dozen cuts. "Jake?" I called out, but there was no answer. I managed to unbuckle my seatbelt and fell to what was now the ceiling of the cab. Jake was unconscious, hanging limp in his restraints, blood pooling beneath his head. I could hear voices outside, the sound of footsteps crunching on broken glass. "Get them out of there," someone was shouting. "We need to make this look like an accident." That is when I realized these people intended to kill us. This had never been about just stealing our cargo. They wanted to eliminate the witnesses. I managed to kick out the windshield and crawl through the opening just as the first man reached the wreckage. In the darkness and confusion, he did not see me slip away into the tall grass beside the highway. From my hiding spot, I watched in horror as they pulled Jake's unconscious form from the cab. "This one is still breathing," one of them said. "Not for long," another replied. "I wanted to help my partner, wanted to rush back and fight for his life, but I was outnumbered and unarmed. The only thing I could do was try to get help, assuming I could make it to town without being caught." The next hour was a nightmare of crawling through ditches, hiding in culverts, and trying to stay ahead of the search parties I could hear spreading out behind me. These people were professionals, organized and methodical in their pursuit. They had radios, they had night vision equipment, and they knew the terrain far better than I did. By sheer luck, I managed to reach the outskirts of the small town just as dawn was breaking. I stumbled into the first business I found open, a diner that served the early morning crowd, and collapsed at the counter. "Please," I gasped to the startled waitress, "and call the police." My partner. They took my partner. The state police response was immediate and massive. Within an hour, there were dozens of officers at the crash site, but it was too late. The hijackers had vanished, taking Jake with them and leaving behind only our overturned truck and a crime scene that told no clear story. The investigation lasted for months, but they never found Jake. The FBI believed we had stumbled into the territory of a sophisticated cargo theft ring that had been operating throughout Texas and Louisiana. The fake accident scene was just one of several methods they used to stop and rob commercial vehicles. But we were the first drivers who had tried to fight back. I learned later that there had been at least 12 similar hijackings over the previous 2 years, but in every other case, the drivers had cooperated and been released unharmed after their cargo was stolen. We were the exception, the ones who fought back, and Jake paid the price for our resistance. I quit team driving after that. I could not stand the thought of putting another partner at risk, could not bear the responsibility of making life and death decisions for someone else. I still drive, but only solo runs, and I avoid remote areas whenever possible. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice that night. If Jake and I had just surrendered quietly, would he still be alive today? The FBI agent assigned to the case told me that fighting back was the correct decision, that these criminals had probably killed drivers before and would have killed us regardless. But knowing that does not make the guilt any easier to carry. The worst part is not knowing what happened to Jake, not knowing if he suffered, if he had any final words, if he understood that I tried to save him. The not knowing eats at you in ways that definite knowledge, however terrible, never could. If you are a driver reading this, learn from my mistake. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Do not stop for accidents that look too neat, too organized. And if you do find yourself in a situation like ours, remember that your life is worth more than any cargo, no matter how valuable. This happened to me about 3 months ago, and I still have trouble sleeping some nights because of it. I have been driving trucks for over 15 years, and I thought I had seen everything the highway could throw at me. But that cold March night on Interstate 80 in Nevada taught me that the road still has secrets I never want to discover again. I was making my usual run from Sacramento to Salt Lake City. It was just past 3:20 a.m., and I was running on black coffee and pure stubbornness. The highway was empty, nothing but endless desert and the occasional coyote caught in my headlights. My Peterbilt was humming along nicely, the radio was playing some late-night blues, and I was settling into that comfortable rhythm every trucker knows. 6 more hours to my destination, and then I could grab some real food and maybe 8 hours of sleep. That is when I saw him. At first, my tired brain processed it as a mirage. There was no way anyone would be out here on foot at this hour, especially not in the middle of nowhere with nothing but salt flats and Joshua trees for miles. But as I got closer, the figure solidified into the unmistakable shape of a man with his thumb out, asking for a ride. I slowed down, my air brakes hissing as I pulled over onto the shoulder. Through 15 years of trucking, I had picked up plenty of hitchhikers. Most were just down on their luck, trying to get to the next town or find work. But something about this man made every instinct I had start screaming warnings. He jogged up to my cab window as I rolled it down just an inch. The man looked to be in his mid-40s, thin build, wearing jeans and a red flannel shirt with black work boots. But his skin had this washed-out, almost translucent quality, like he had never seen sunlight or was caught perpetually under fluorescent lighting. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and when they settled on me, I felt a chill run down my spine. "Where you headed?" I called through the glass. "East." "Anywhere east," he replied, his voice oddly flat and emotionless. Every fiber of my being told me to drive away, but the thought of leaving someone stranded in this desolate stretch weighed on my conscience. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in slowly, sitting rigidly upright and clutching a battered backpack. The scent that came with him was strange. It was not the smell of sweat or the road, but something sharp and antiseptic, like ammonia mixed with fresh paint. The cab temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment he settled into the seat. I shifted back into drive and merged onto the highway. trying to make conversation. "Name is David," I offered. He nodded but did not return the greeting. Instead, he stared straight ahead through the windshield, his fingers gripping that beat-up pack like his life depended on it. I tried again. "Where exactly are you coming from?" The man shrugged, the slightest hint of what might have been a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Nowhere, really. Just traveling." The next 20 minutes passed in complete silence except for the steady drone of my engine and the rhythmic slap of tires on concrete. I found myself alternating between watching the empty highway ahead and sneaking cautious glances at my passenger. I had picked up enough hitchhikers over the years to recognize the signs. Some were running from trouble, others were just down on their luck. But this man went beyond nervous or cautious. There was something fundamentally wrong about him. That is when I noticed it in my mirrors. Out of habit, I checked my side mirror for what must have been the 100th time that night. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. The man sitting right beside me cast no reflection. In the dim glass, I could see the empty passenger seat, the dashboard lights, even the texture of the upholstery. But where my passenger should have been, there was absolutely nothing. I blinked hard, convinced that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Not enough sleep, too much caffeine, maybe the stress of the long haul was finally getting to me. But every time I glanced at that mirror, the same impossible sight greeted me. Empty seat, no shadow, no shape, no reflection at all. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I focused on the road ahead, trying to control the panic that was building in my chest. Stories my grandfather used to tell came flooding back. Tales from rural Arkansas about haints and lost souls, about the dead who walked between midnight and dawn, forever seeking rides to places they could never reach. The silence in the cab became suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel cold sweat trickling down my back despite the heater running full blast. The rational part of my mind kept insisting there had to be an explanation. But every primal instinct I possessed was screaming that I was sharing my cab with something that should not exist. "I need to drop you at the next rest stop," I said finally. My voice carefully controlled despite the fear clawing at my throat. The man slowly turned his head to look directly at me. His gaze felt like ice water running through my veins. "That will not be necessary. I know exactly where I'm going." "You sure about that?" I managed to ask. "Positive," he replied, and his voice seemed to come from somewhere far away. Minutes crawled by like hours. The heater, which had been working perfectly, suddenly began blowing cold air. Frost started creeping along the edges of my windshield, and my breath began to fog in the suddenly frigid cabin. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The world outside had turned hostile and alien. Even the stars seemed to disappear behind a veil of darkness. Without thinking, I started whispering a prayer I remembered from childhood, words my grandmother had taught me for protection against things that go bump in the night. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the atmosphere in the cab shifted. The passenger spoke quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Take the next exit. I have people waiting for me." Ahead, an old and battered road sign emerged from the darkness. "Lone Wells Rest Area, half mile." The green paint was faded and peeling, the reflective strips dulled with age. I pulled off the highway, my wheels crunching on the frost-covered gravel of what looked like an abandoned truck stop. The parking lot was completely empty, not a single other vehicle in sight. A retro neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie blue glow across a building that looked like it had been closed for years. All the windows were black as midnight. My passenger began to open the door, then paused and looked back at me. In that moment, his eyes changed. They became impossibly deep, glinting with a pale, otherworldly reflection that made my soul shudder. "Thank you for the ride, David," he said softly. "Keep your eyes on the road from now on. Some things are better left unseen." He stepped out and walked steadily toward the building. I watched in growing horror as the front doors, which should have been locked and chained, swung open soundlessly for him. He disappeared into the darkness beyond, and the doors closed behind him with no sound at all. I do not know how long I sat there, too terrified to move, my heart hammering against my ribs. Time seemed suspended in that moment, reality itself called into question. Then, like salvation breaking through a nightmare, headlights cut through the darkness. Another semi rolled into the lot and parked nearby. I practically fell out of my cab, desperate for contact with another living human being. The other driver stepped down, stretching after his long haul, then glanced toward the dark building. "Did you see a man go in there just now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Red flannel shirt, black boots, carrying a backpack?" The driver shook his head, frowning with concern. "Buddy, I have not seen a soul here tonight. This place has been boarded up for years, completely abandoned on my last 3 runs through here." I turned back toward the building, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The front doors were chained shut from the outside, heavy chains and padlocks that looked like they had been there for decades. The neon sign had gone completely dark. There were no footprints in the frost-covered gravel, no sign that anyone had walked this way. Fighting every instinct that screamed at me to run, I crept closer and peered through a crack in the filthy glass. Inside, I could see only abandoned bathroom stalls, overturned chairs covered in dust, and the kind of silence that comes with years of emptiness. As dawn finally broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I climbed back into my cab. I sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened, trying to convince myself it had all been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much caffeine. But deep down, I knew better. I did not tell anyone about that night, not at first. But rumors have a way of spreading among truckers, stories shared over coffee and pie at all-night diners. Within weeks, other drivers were talking about sightings of a specter in red on that lonely stretch of I-80, always looking for a ride east, always disappearing without a trace. When I finally broke my silence at a truck stop outside Reno, an old woman driver named Mabel listened to my story without interruption. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I have seen him too," she whispered, leaning closer across the worn Formica table. "They say he is always looking for a ride east, trying to get somewhere he can never reach. Did he thank you when he left?" I thought about those final words, the way his eyes had changed, the gratitude in his voice that had seemed so genuine despite everything else. "Yes," I said. "He thanked me." "Then you are one of the lucky ones," she said, her weathered face serious. "Sometimes he does not." For months after that night, I avoided the Nevada stretch entirely, taking longer routes that added hours to my runs but kept me far from that cursed rest stop. I stopped picking up hitchhikers altogether and started carrying a small cross on my dashboard. But sometimes, on clear, cold nights when the moon hangs low and the highway stretches endlessly ahead, I swear I can still see a pale figure standing in the edge of my peripheral vision. He is always there and not there, waiting patiently for the next trucker willing to offer a ride to nowhere, forever seeking passage to a destination that exists somewhere between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond. I still drive that road occasionally now, when the money is too good to pass up. But I never stop at rest areas after midnight, and I never look too closely in my mirrors on those long, dark stretches of highway. Some things, as my passenger warned me, are better left unseen. And if you ever find yourself driving through Nevada in the small hours of the morning and you see a lone figure with his thumb out on the side of the road, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Trust me on this one. Some rides are not worth the risk. They're not. I have been an owner-operator for 8 years now, running routes through the Pacific Northwest, and I thought I knew every truck stop, every rest area, and every safe spot to park between Seattle and Portland. The forests up there are dense, ancient things that have been growing since before humans ever set foot in North America. Most of the time, they are beautiful in a way that takes your breath away. But sometimes, late at night, when you are alone with nothing but darkness pressing against your windows, those same forests can feel like they are hiding secrets that were never meant to be discovered. This happened to me last October during what should have been a routine delivery run from Tacoma to Eugene. I was hauling electronic components, nothing special, just another load that needed to get there on time. The weather had been acting up all week, with heavy rains making some of the mountain passes treacherous for big rigs. By the time I reached the halfway point of my route, I was running behind schedule, and my logbook was showing that I needed to take my mandatory rest break whether I wanted to or not. I pulled into a truck stop called Pine Ridge Rest Area, about 40 miles south of Olympia. It was one of those older facilities that the state had built back in the 70s, tucked away in a grove of massive Douglas fir trees that towered over the parking area like ancient sentinels. During the day, the place had a rustic charm that made it popular with tourists and RV travelers. But at night, especially on a cold October evening with fog rolling in from the coast, it felt isolated and somehow vulnerable. The parking area was nearly empty when I arrived around 11:30 p.m. Just my rig and a couple of cars that probably belonged to late shift workers heading home. The facility building was closed for the night, leaving only the vending machines and the exterior lighting to push back against the darkness that seemed to pour out of the surrounding forest like a living thing. I went through my usual routine, checking my load securement, doing a quick walk-around inspection, and settling into my sleeper berth with a sandwich and a thermos of coffee. The plan was simple: get my required 8 hours of rest, then hit the road early to make up for lost time. I had done this same routine hundreds of times before at dozens of different locations. It should have been just another night. But from the moment I climbed into my bunk, something felt wrong. The forest around the rest area was too quiet. I am used to the normal sounds of wilderness at night: owls calling, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, maybe the distant howl of a coyote. But this silence was absolute, as if every living creature in those woods had suddenly decided to hold its breath. Even the wind, which had been gusting all evening, had died down to nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just the weather, maybe the approaching fog bank that was muffling the usual forest sounds. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to the oppressive quiet, I began to feel like I was being watched. It started as just a feeling, that prickly sensation you get on the back of your neck when someone is staring at you. I checked my mirrors, scanned the parking lot through my windows, even got up to look outside. Nothing. Just empty pavement and the wall of trees beyond the reach of the security lights. Around 1:15 a.m. I heard the first sound. It was subtle at first, just the faintest whisper of movement in the undergrowth at the edge of the tree line. The kind of sound a deer might make stepping carefully through fallen leaves. But there was something about the rhythm of it that did not seem quite right. It was too deliberate, too measured, like something was trying very hard not to be heard. I sat up in my bunk and pressed my face to the window, straining to see into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. The fog had grown thicker, creating shifting curtains of gray that made it impossible to see more than 30 feet in any direction. But I could swear I caught a glimpse of movement, something dark and tall moving between the trees. Over the next hour, the sounds grew more frequent and more disturbing. Footsteps circling my truck at a distance, always staying just outside the pool of light cast by the security fixtures. the snap of twigs being broken underfoot, and once what sounded unmistakably like breathing, deep and ragged, coming from somewhere very close to my driver's side door. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed into the cab, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the windshield, I could see the fog swirling in unnatural patterns, as if something large was moving through it just beyond the range of my vision. I hit my high beams, flooding the area in front of my truck with brilliant white light. For just a moment, I saw it clearly. The figure stood about 50 yards away at the very edge where the pavement met the forest floor. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with impossibly long limbs and a gaunt frame that seemed to bend and twist in ways that human joints simply do not allow. Its skin looked pale and mottled in the glare of my headlights, stretched tight over protruding bones. But it was the eyes that made my blood turn to ice water. They reflected my headlight beams like an animal's eyes, but they were too large, too intelligent, and filled with a hunger that I felt in the deepest part of my soul. The moment my lights hit it, the thing moved, not running like a person or even like an animal, but flowing through the fog with a fluid motion that defied everything I thought I knew about how living things are supposed to move. Within seconds, it had vanished back into the tree line, leaving me staring at empty forest and wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew I had not imagined it. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming that I was in mortal danger. I reached for my CB radio to call for help, but all I got was static. My cell phone showed no signal, which was not unusual in this remote area, but the timing felt ominous. I was completely cut off from the outside world, alone with whatever was stalking me through those ancient trees. The next few hours were the longest of my life. The thing, whatever it was, continued to circle my truck like a predator testing the defenses of its prey. I could hear it moving through the underbrush, sometimes close enough that I was certain it was just outside my door. Other times retreating deeper into the forest, only to return minutes later from a different direction. Around 3:30 a.m., it got bolder. I was lying in my sleeper berth, flashlight in one hand and my tire iron in the other, when I heard something that made my hair stand on end. Scratching sounds like claws being dragged across metal coming from somewhere above my head. The thing was on top of my trailer. The scratching moved slowly from the back of the trailer toward the front, each scrape of claw against metal sending vibrations through the entire rig. I could feel the truck swaying slightly under the weight of whatever was up there. When the sounds reached the area directly above my sleeper berth, they stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear breathing again. Slow, deliberate inhalations and exhalations that seemed far too large to come from human lungs. Then, without warning, something began tapping on the roof directly above where I lay. Not the random scratching of before, but a rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. It was trying to communicate. Terror gave way to a surge of desperate courage. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed back into the cab, then rolled down my window and stuck my head out to look up at the roof of my trailer. The fog had thickened even more, but I could make out a dark shape hunched on the aluminum surface about 10 feet behind the cab. "What do you want?" I shouted into the night. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. Then the shape on my roof began to move again, sliding down the back of the trailer with the same unnatural fluidity I had witnessed earlier. Within seconds, it had dropped to the ground and disappeared into the fog. But I could still feel it watching me, waiting. As dawn finally began to break through the fog, painting the forest in shades of gray and pale yellow, I heard the sound of another vehicle pulling into the rest area. A state patrol car making its routine early morning check of the facility. I have never been so glad to see law enforcement in my entire life. The officer was a middle-aged woman named Sergeant Martinez, who had been patrolling this stretch of highway for 12 years. When I told her about my night, leaving out the more unbelievable details, she nodded grimly. "You are not the first trucker to report strange encounters at this location," she said, scanning the tree line with professional alertness. "We have had at least 6 similar reports over the past 2 years, always single drivers, always during the overnight hours." She walked around my truck examining the scratches on the roof of my trailer. The metal was gouged in long parallel lines that looked like they had been made by claws, but claws much larger than any animal native to the Pacific Northwest. "What do you think made these marks?" I asked. Sergeant Martinez was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at me. "Officially? Probably tree branches scraping against your trailer during the windstorm last night. Unofficially?" She paused, glancing back at the forest. "I have lived in this area my whole life, and there are things in these old woods that do not appear in any field guide or natural history book. My grandmother used to tell stories about creatures that the Quinault tribe called the Tall Walkers. Beings that were here long before the first European settlers, things that most people have forgotten how to see." Before I left that morning, Sergeant Martinez gave me some advice that I have never forgotten. "If you have to stop here again," she said, "do it during daylight hours. And if you see anything moving in those trees after dark, do not try to communicate with it. Some things are better left alone." I took her advice to heart. I have driven past Pine Ridge Rest Area dozens of times since that night, but I have never stopped there after sunset again. I have also started carrying more than just a tire iron for protection, though I doubt conventional weapons would do much good against something like what I encountered. Other truckers I have talked to have shared similar stories from remote areas throughout the Northwest. Sightings of tall, gaunt figures moving through old-growth forests. Encounters with things that walk upright but are definitely not human. Most drivers do not report these incidents officially, knowing how crazy they sound, but the stories spread through the trucking community anyway. I still run routes through the Pacific Northwest regularly. The money is good, and despite what happened, I love the rugged beauty of the region. But I have learned to be more careful about where I take my mandatory rest breaks. Some places are safe for travelers and others are not. The trick is knowing the difference before you find yourself alone in the dark with something that sees you not as a fellow living being, but as prey. The scratches on my trailer took 3 months to fade completely, and even now, almost a year later, I can still see faint marks if I know where to look. They serve as a reminder that there are still wild places in this world where humans are not the dominant species, where ancient things still hunt in the shadows between the trees. If you ever find yourself driving through the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest and you need to stop for the night, choose your parking spot carefully. Stay close to other travelers, keep your doors locked, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if the forest gets too quiet, if you catch glimpses of movement in the darkness beyond your headlights, do not ignore those warning signs. Start your engine and drive away. Some encounters are not worth the risk, and some things that live in the deep woods are better left undisturbed. I am going to tell you about something that happened to me last September. Something that still makes me question everything I thought I knew about reality. My name is Matthew, and I have been driving cross-country routes for 22 years. In that time, I have seen just about everything the highway can throw at you. Blizzards, tornadoes, flash floods, and every kind of mechanical breakdown imaginable. But nothing in all those years of experience prepared me for what I encountered on a seemingly ordinary stretch of Interstate 35 through rural Iowa. I was hauling a load of agricultural equipment from Des Moines to Kansas City, a routine run that I had made dozens of times before. The weather was perfect, clear skies and mild temperatures, and I was making good time. I had left Des Moines around 8 p.m., planning to drive straight through the night and arrive in Kansas City by morning. It should have been one of those easy runs that remind you why you love life on the road. Everything was normal until around midnight. I was cruising through the heart of Iowa farmland, nothing but cornfields stretching endlessly on both sides of the highway. The radio was playing classic rock, my coffee was still hot, and I was settling into that comfortable rhythm that long-haul drivers know so well. That is when I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. I had just passed a road sign that read Osceola, 47 miles, when my GPS started acting strangely. The screen flickered for a moment, then showed a route that made no sense. According to the device, I was somehow driving north instead of south, and my destination had changed to someplace called Nowhere, Iowa, that did not exist on any map. I figured it was just a technical glitch. GPS units malfunction all the time, especially in remote areas where satellite coverage can be spotty. I turned off the device and relied on my own knowledge of the route. After 22 years of driving, I knew Interstate 35 like the back of my hand. I could navigate it blindfolded. But then I passed the same road sign again. Osceola, 47 miles. Exactly the same distance, in exactly the same location. I checked my odometer and confirmed that I had been driving for over an hour since the first time I saw that sign. At 65 miles per hour, I should have covered at least 60 miles, putting me well past Osceola and deep into Missouri. But according to the sign, I had not made any progress at all. I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe there were two identical signs, or maybe I had gotten turned around somehow without realizing it. But as I continued driving south, watching my mirrors and scanning the horizon for familiar landmarks, I began to accept the impossible truth. I was trapped in some kind of loop. Over the next few hours, I passed the same sequence of landmarks repeatedly. The same farmhouse with the red barn and the rusted silo, the same overpass carrying a county road across the interstate, the same billboard advertising a truck stop that, according to the sign, was only 15 miles away, but which I never seemed to reach. And always, every 53 miles exactly, the sign for Osceola promising it was 47 miles ahead. The worst part was the time. My dashboard clock was stuck at 3:17 a.m. No matter how long I drove, no matter how many miles I covered according to my odometer, the clock never advanced. My watch had stopped at the same time, and my cell phone showed no signal and a frozen display. Time itself had become meaningless in this stretch of highway that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of reality. I tried everything I could think of to break free from whatever was happening to me. I took the next exit ramp, only to find myself back on the highway heading south with no memory of how I got there. I pulled over and turned off my engine, thinking maybe I could wait it out, but when I started driving again, I was right back at the beginning of the loop. I even tried turning around and driving north, hoping to escape the trapped section of highway by going in the opposite direction. But after what felt like hours of northbound travel, I found myself approaching the same familiar landmarks from the south, as if the road had somehow twisted back on itself. The fuel gauge was the most disturbing thing of all. Logic said I should have been running out of diesel hours ago, but the needle never moved from the 3/4 tank mark where it had been when the loop began. The engine ran perfectly, consuming fuel that somehow replenished itself, defying every law of physics I understood. As the experience dragged on, I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Sleep deprivation can cause hallucinations, and I had been driving for hours before the loop started. Maybe I had dozed off behind the wheel and was now trapped in some kind of nightmare brought on by exhaustion and stress. But everything felt too real to be a dream. I could smell the diesel fumes, feel the vibration of the engine through the steering wheel, taste the bitter coffee that never seemed to get cold. If this was a hallucination, it was the most complete and convincing one in medical history. I tried talking to other drivers on the CB radio, but all I got was static. Channel 19, which should have been busy with trucker chatter even in the middle of the night, was completely silent. It was as if I was the only person left in the world, trapped forever on this impossible stretch of highway that led nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The strangest part was how normal everything looked. This was not some hellish landscape or supernatural realm. It was just ordinary Iowa farmland under an ordinary star-filled sky. If not for the repetition and the frozen time, I might never have realized anything was wrong. The mundane nature of the trap made it somehow more terrifying than any obvious supernatural phenomenon would have been. Pure, what should have been dawn, but with the clock still frozen at 3:17 a.m. I had made the loop at least 15 times. I had memorized every detail of the 53-mile circuit, every fence post, every road sign, every slight curve in the asphalt. I knew exactly when to expect each landmark and could predict the view around every bend. That is when I started seeing the other vehicles. They appeared gradually, faintly at first, like mirages shimmering in the distance. Other trucks, cars, motorcycles, all traveling the same endless route. As I focused on them, they became more solid, more real. I could see the drivers, their faces blank and expressionless, staring straight ahead as they completed lap after lap of the same impossible circuit. I tried to signal them, flashing my lights and honking my horn, but they never responded. They seemed unaware of my presence, unaware of their situation, mechanically following the highway in a trance-like state that chilled me to the bone. I began to wonder how long they had been trapped here. Whether some of them had been driving this loop for days, weeks, or even years. The thought that I might join them, that I might eventually lose awareness of my situation and become another mindless ghost driver, filled me with desperate panic. I had to find a way out before that happened, before whatever force was controlling this place claimed my consciousness as well as my physical presence. I started looking for details I had missed before, searching for some clue that might reveal the nature of my prison or provide a key to escape. That is when I noticed the mile markers were wrong. Instead of consecutive numbers marking distance along the interstate, they all showed the same number, 217. Mile marker 217 repeated endlessly, as if this section of highway existed in its own pocket of space-time. As I pondered this discovery, I began to notice that the landscape was not as identical as I had originally thought. There were subtle variations from loop to loop, small changes that suggested the repetition was not perfect. A fence might have one more post, a billboard might be slightly faded, a cloud formation might be different. It was as if I was experiencing multiple versions of the same stretch of highway, variations on a theme rather than exact duplicates. This realization gave me hope. If the loop was not perfect, if there were variations between iterations, then perhaps there was a version where the trap did not exist. I just had to find the right combination of factors that would allow me to break free. I started paying closer attention to these small differences, trying to map the variations and understand their pattern. After several more loops, I thought I detected a rhythm to the changes. The variations seemed to be building towards something, accumulating like static before a thunderstorm. Then, just as the eastern horizon should have been showing the first hints of dawn, everything changed. The frozen clock on my dashboard suddenly jumped to 6:45 a.m. The landscape around me shifted subtly, becoming more vivid and detailed. The other phantom vehicles faded away like smoke, leaving me alone on the highway once again. And there, ahead of me where the Osceola sign should have been, was a different marker entirely. Kansas City, 127 miles. I was free. I drove the remaining distance to Kansas City in a daze, unable to fully process what had happened to me. When I finally arrived at my destination, I discovered that my delivery log showed impossible timestamps. According to my paperwork, I had somehow covered the entire distance from Des Moines to Kansas City in negative time, arriving before I had left. I have never experienced anything like that night again, but I have heard similar stories from other drivers. Tales of highways that lead nowhere, of time behaving strangely on certain routes, of sections of road that seem to exist outside normal reality. Most drivers dismiss these stories as the products of exhaustion and imagination, but I know better now. There are places where the familiar rules do not apply, where the highway becomes something more than just a path between destinations. And if you find yourself driving through one of those places in the deep hours of the night, pay attention to the mile markers. If they stop making sense, if time seems to slow down or stop entirely, if the same landmarks keep appearing no matter how far you drive, do not panic. Keep driving, keep watching, and wait for the pattern to break. Eventually, if you are lucky, the road will remember where it is supposed to lead. I need to share what happened to me during my years driving the northern routes through Montana before I finally had to give up trucking altogether. My name is Joshua, and I spent 12 years hauling freight across the loneliest stretches of highway in America. I always preferred the night shift, loved the solitude and the peace that came with having the road to myself. But there are some kinds of solitude that no human being should ever have to experience, and I learned that lesson the hard way on the remote highways of Big Sky country. It started about 2 years ago on a routine run from Billings to Great Falls. I was carrying a load of construction equipment, heavy steel beams and concrete forms that made my rig handle like a loaded freight train. The weather was clear, temperature in the low 30s, and I was making good time on Highway 87 through the heart of Montana ranch country. Around 1:30 a.m., I switched on my CB radio to channel 19, hoping to catch some trucker chatter or maybe get an update on road conditions ahead. But instead of the usual mix of conversations and static, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice was calling my name. "Joshua," it said, crackling through the speaker with that distinctive CB distortion. "Joshua, can you hear me?" I grabbed the microphone, my hands suddenly shaking. In 12 years of trucking, no one had ever used my real name on the CB. Drivers go by their handles, their company call signs, anything but their actual names. It is an unwritten rule of the road. "Who is this?" I asked. "How do you know my name?" Static filled the channel for a long moment. Then the voice returned. It was different this time, older and more gravelly. "We have been waiting for you, Joshua. We have been waiting a long time." Waiting for what? Who is we? But the voice did not answer directly. Instead, it began describing my route in perfect detail. The mile markers I had just passed, the small towns sleeping in the darkness to my left and right, even the specific load I was carrying. Whoever was talking knew exactly where I was and where I was going. I tried switching to different channels, but the voices followed me. Channel 12, Channel 15, Channel 21, it did not matter. They were always there, always talking about me, always using my name in ways that made my skin crawl. Over the next hour, more voices joined the conversation. They spoke to each other about me as if I was not listening, discussing my route, my cargo, even personal details about my life that no stranger should have known. They talked about my divorce 3 years earlier, about the house I had lost in the settlement, about my ex-wife's new husband who worked at a bank in Missoula. "He is getting close to Lewistown," one voice said. It sounded like an old woman, her words stretched thin by age and static. Should we tell him about the accident? "What accident?" I demanded, keying my microphone. "What are you talking about?" "The one at mile marker 247, another voice replied. This one was younger, maybe a teenager, but there was something wrong with the way it spoke. The words came too slowly, like someone learning to talk for the first time. 3 cars. Very bad. You should slow down, Joshua. I looked at my odometer and realized with growing horror that mile marker 247 was only about 10 miles ahead of me. These voices, whoever they were giving me information about events that had not happened yet. I slowed down anyway, reducing my speed from 65 to 45 as I approached the area they had mentioned. Sure enough, just past mile marker 247, I saw the flashing lights of emergency vehicles scattered across both lanes of the highway. State police, ambulances, a fire truck with its ladder extended. 3 mangled cars were scattered across the median, and I could see paramedics working frantically around what looked like multiple casualties. I pulled over and tried to help, but the state trooper directing traffic waved me on. "Keep moving, driver," he shouted over the noise of the emergency equipment. "We have got this under control." As I drove past the accident scene, the voices on my CB started laughing. Not the normal laughter of human beings, but something hollow and echoing like sounds bouncing around inside an empty barrel. "Did you see, Joshua?" the old woman's voice asked. "Did you see what we showed you?" "How did you know?" I whispered into the microphone. "How could you possibly know about that accident before it happened?" "We know lots of things," the teenage voice replied. "We know about the truck stop in Great Falls where you always eat breakfast. We know about the waitress there, the one with the red hair who you think is pretty but who you are too shy to talk to. We know about the motel room you keep reserved for Tuesday nights, room 237 at the Roadway Inn." Every detail was correct. I had been eating at the same truck stop in Great Falls for 3 years. And there was indeed a red-haired waitress there who I had developed a crush on, but had never worked up the courage to approach. Room 237 at the Roadway Inn was my regular spot, reserved standing for my weekly runs through the area. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The voices went silent for several minutes, leaving only static and the distant murmur of other channels bleeding through. When they returned, there were more of them than before. I counted at least 7 distinct speakers, ranging from what sounded like a small child to an elderly man with a thick accent I could not identify. They began telling me stories. Stories about other truckers who had driven these same routes, drivers who had disappeared without explanation or been found dead in their cabs with no apparent cause. They spoke about accidents that had been arranged, about mechanical failures that had been orchestrated, about drivers who had been driven insane by voices on their CB radios. "We collect them," the child's voice explained with innocent enthusiasm. "The lonely ones, the ones who drive at night when nobody else is around. They come to live with us in the space between the channels. That is where we are now," the old man added. "In the static between frequencies, in the empty places where radio waves go to die. It is not so bad here, Joshua. There is no traffic, no deadlines, no dispatchers yelling at you about delivery times. Just the open road forever and always." I tried to turn off the radio, but it would not shut off. The voices continued even when I unplugged it from the power source, even when I removed the fuses from the electrical panel. They were not coming through the radio anymore, they were coming from inside my own head. As I continued driving toward Great Falls, the voices became more personal, more invasive. They began discussing my thoughts as I had them, commenting on my fears and reactions in real time. When I wondered if I was losing my mind, they laughed and assured me that sanity was overrated. When I considered pulling over and calling for help, they reminded me that my cell phone had no signal in this remote area. "There is nowhere to run, Joshua," the old woman said gently. "We are inside you now. We know everything you know, feel everything you feel. You belong to us." By the time I reached Great Falls, I was barely holding on to my sanity. The voices had been talking continuously for over 6 hours, describing every mile of road, every passing car, every thought that crossed my mind. They knew my social security number, my bank account balance, the name of my first dog, the recurring nightmare I had been having since childhood. I completed my delivery in a daze, unloaded my cargo with shaking hands, and checked into my usual room at the Roadway Inn. But the voices followed me there, commenting on the faded wallpaper, the broken air conditioning unit, the way I always slept on the left side of the bed. Over the next several weeks, the situation only got worse. The voices were with me constantly now, not just while I was driving, but every moment of every day. They critiqued my choice of breakfast cereal, discussed the quality of truck stop coffee, offered unwanted advice about my driving technique. Sleep became impossible because they would whisper continuously in my ears, telling stories about other drivers they had collected over the years. I tried everything I could think of to get rid of them. I saw doctors who prescribed medication for schizophrenia. I visited a priest who attempted an exorcism. I even consulted a psychiatrist who specialized in stress-related disorders in professional drivers. Nothing helped. The voices remained, as constant and inescapable as my own heartbeat. The final straw came 3 months later on another night run through Montana. I was hauling automotive parts from Bozeman to Helena when the voices began giving me directions that differed from my planned route. They insisted I take a series of back roads through the wilderness, promising they would show me something special if I followed their guidance. Against my better judgment, I obeyed. The alternative routes led me deeper into the mountains along increasingly narrow and treacherous roads that barely accommodated my large rig. Hours passed as I climbed switchbacks and navigated hairpin turns, following directions from voices that laughed and whispered encouragement with every mile. Finally, they directed me to stop at an overlook beside a deep canyon. As I set my air brakes, they explained what they wanted to show me. "Look down there, Joshua," the child's voice said excitedly. "Look at all the trucks." I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the edge of the overlook, then shined the beam down into the canyon below. What I saw made my knees buckle with terror. Hundreds of semi-trucks were scattered across the canyon floor, rusted and twisted wrecks that looked like they had been there for years or even decades. Some were partially buried by rock slides, others were burned out shells, but all of them showed the unmistakable signs of having driven straight off the cliff above. "These are our friends," the old woman's voice explained, "drivers who decided to join us permanently. It is very peaceful down there, Joshua. No more schedules, no more traffic, no more loneliness, just eternal rest in the company of fellow travelers." That was when I understood what the voices wanted from me. They were not just tormenting me for entertainment, they were recruiting me. Gradually wearing down my resistance until I would be willing to drive my truck off a cliff just to make them stop talking. I ran back to my rig, started the engine, and drove away from that overlook as fast as the winding mountain roads would allow. The voices screamed at me for hours, angry that I had rejected their invitation, but I kept driving until I reached the main highway again. The next morning, I turned in my resignation to the trucking company and walked away from the profession that had been my life for 12 years. The voices still talk to me sometimes, usually late at night when the world is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts. But they have less power over me now that I am not isolated on remote highways. Less ability to manipulate my reality when I am surrounded by other people and normal human conversation. I work at a warehouse now, loading and unloading trucks for other drivers. It is honest work, and it keeps me grounded in the normal world where voices come from human beings instead of empty frequencies in the radio spectrum. Sometimes I see the fear in a driver's eyes when they talk about the long-haul routes through Montana, and I want to warn them about what waits out there in the darkness between radio stations. But I know they would not believe me, just like I would not have believed anyone who had tried to warn me. So I keep my story to myself, and I count myself lucky to have escaped the fate of those drivers whose trucks rest forever in that hidden canyon. But on quiet nights when the wind is blowing just right, I can still hear them calling my name from somewhere far away, promising me that the road is waiting whenever I am ready to return. I need to tell someone about what happened to me at a truck stop in Arizona last year. It is something that still gives me nightmares, and I hope sharing it might help other female drivers stay safe out there. My name is Brittany, and I have been driving professionally for 7 years. Being a woman in this industry means you learn to be extra careful, extra aware, and extra prepared for situations that male drivers might never have to face. I was hauling a load of textiles from Los Angeles to Phoenix, a routine run that I had made dozens of times before. It was early November and the desert nights were getting cold, so I was looking forward to a hot meal and maybe a shower before getting my mandatory rest. I pulled into a large truck stop just outside Flagstaff around 9:30 p.m., one of those 24-hour places with a restaurant, convenience store, and full-service facilities. The parking lot was about half full, which was normal for that time of night. I found a spot near the back where I could park my rig without blocking anyone, but close enough to the main building that I would feel safe walking back and forth. As a woman driver, you learn to think about these things: lighting, visibility, escape routes. They become second nature after a while. I went through my usual routine, secured my load, did a quick inspection of my equipment, then headed inside to grab dinner and use the facilities. The truck stop was busy but not crowded, filled with the usual mix of drivers, travelers, and local workers stopping by for coffee and snacks. I noticed him while I was ordering food at the restaurant counter. He was sitting alone in a booth near the window, a thin man in his 40s with greasy hair and clothes that looked like they had not been washed in weeks. What caught my attention was not his appearance, but the way he was watching me. His eyes followed my every movement as I ordered my meal, paid at the register, and found a table on the opposite side of the dining area. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my food and the trucking magazine I had brought in with me. But every time I looked up, he was still staring. Not the casual glance you might give to another person in a restaurant, but an intense, predatory stare that made my skin crawl. When I finished eating and got up to leave, he got up too. When I stopped at the convenience store to buy coffee for the road, he lingered nearby, pretending to browse the magazine rack while keeping me in his peripheral vision. When I walked back out to the parking lot, he followed at a distance. My truck was parked in a row with several others, and as I approached it, I could see him reflected in the side mirrors, hanging back about 50 yards, but definitely following me. Every instinct I had developed over 7 years of solo driving was screaming warnings. I climbed into my cab and immediately locked the doors, then sat there for a few minutes watching him in my mirrors. He had stopped next to a pickup truck several spaces away and was making a show of checking his tires, but his attention was clearly still focused on me. I considered driving away immediately, finding another place to take my rest break, but federal regulations required me to log 8 hours of off-duty time before I could legally drive again. I was already pushing close to my maximum allowable hours, and I could not afford to get pulled over for a logbook violation. Instead, I decided to wait him out. Surely he would get tired of whatever game he was playing and move on to bother someone else, or better yet, just leave entirely. I settled into my sleeper berth with a book and tried to relax, checking my mirrors periodically to see if he was still out there. He was. For over an hour, he stayed near that pickup truck, sometimes sitting on the tailgate, sometimes walking around the vehicle, but always positioned where he could keep an eye on my truck. Other drivers came and went around us, but he seemed oblivious to everything except me. Around 11:30 p.m., I finally saw him walk back toward the main building, and I allowed myself to relax a little. Maybe he had given up. Maybe he was just some harmless weirdo who got his kicks from making women uncomfortable. I closed my curtains, turned off my interior lights, and tried to get some sleep. I was awakened around 2:15 a.m. by the sound of footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, circling my truck. I lay perfectly still in my bunk, listening as the footsteps moved from the front of my rig to the driver's side, then around to the back of the trailer, then up the passenger side. Whoever was out there was taking their time, studying my truck, looking for weaknesses. The footsteps stopped near my passenger door, and I could hear the soft sound of someone breathing heavily just outside. Then came the gentle rattle of a door handle being tested. My passenger door was locked, but the sound of someone trying to open it made my blood turn to ice. I reached for my cell phone to call 911, but realized I had no signal. The truck stop was in one of those dead zones where cellular coverage was spotty at best. I was on my own. The person outside moved to my driver's door and tested that handle as well. When it did not open, I heard what sounded like metal tools being scraped against the lock mechanism. He was trying to break into my truck. I grabbed the tire iron I kept under my bunk and crept forward to the cab, staying low and trying not to make any noise that would alert him to the fact that I was awake. Through a gap in my curtains, I could see a figure hunched beside my driver's door, working on the lock with what looked like a set of lockpicks. That is when I realized this was not some random opportunist. This was someone who had come prepared, someone who had done this before. The way he moved, the tools he carried, the patience he showed, everything about his behavior suggested experience and planning. I was trapped. If I tried to start my truck and drive away, he would hear the engine and might panic, possibly becoming violent. If I stayed where I was, he might succeed in getting the door open, and I would be cornered in my sleeper berth with nowhere to run. I decided to take the offensive. I moved to my driver's seat as quietly as possible, then suddenly flipped on all my exterior lights and laid on the horn. The blast of sound shattered the night silence, and I saw the figure outside stumble backward in surprise. "Get away from my truck!" I screamed through the closed window. "I am calling the police." The man looked up at me, and in the harsh glare of my headlights, I could see his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were wild and unfocused, his expression a mixture of rage and frustration. He was not just some harmless creep. This was someone dangerous, someone who had been planning to do serious harm. Instead of running away, he moved toward my driver's door again, this time producing what looked like a crowbar. He was going to try to force his way in. I kept the horn blaring while I reached for my CB radio, broadcasting on channel 19 for any driver who might be listening. "Mayday, mayday, this is a female driver under attack at the Flagstaff truck stop. I need immediate assistance. Repeat, I need help now." The response was immediate. Several drivers came back over the radio, and I could see lights coming on in other trucks around the parking lot. Within minutes, at least 4 other truckers were walking toward my location, some carrying flashlights and tire irons of their own. The man with the crowbar saw them coming and finally decided to retreat. He ran toward the pickup truck he had been lurking near earlier, but instead of getting in it, he disappeared into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. One of the drivers who had come to help tried to follow him, but he had vanished into the desert scrub. The state police arrived about 20 minutes later, followed by the local sheriff's department. They took my statement and examined my truck for evidence of the attempted break-in, finding scratches around both door locks that confirmed someone had indeed tried to pick them. The detective who handled the case told me that I was lucky to have fought back when I did. Over the past 18 months, there had been at least 6 similar incidents at truck stops throughout Arizona and New Mexico, all targeting female drivers who were resting alone. In 3 of those cases, the attacker had succeeded in gaining entry to the cab, and the outcomes had been tragic. They never caught the man who attacked me that night. The pickup truck he had been using turned out to be stolen, abandoned in a parking lot in Flagstaff the next morning. Security cameras at the truck stop had malfunctioned conveniently, providing no useful footage of the incident. I completed my run to Phoenix the next day, but I have never felt the same level of security while taking my rest breaks. I installed additional locks on my doors, carry multiple communication devices in case my cell phone fails, and always park as close to the main building as possible. I also invested in a personal alarm system that connects directly to emergency services. The experience taught me that the dangers female drivers face on the road go beyond mechanical breakdowns and bad weather. There are predators out there who specifically target women in the trucking industry, taking advantage of our isolation and the remote locations where we are required to rest. I have shared my story with other female drivers whenever possible, hoping to help them stay alert and prepared. We look out for each other in this industry, sharing information about safe parking spots and dangerous locations, but it should not be our responsibility alone to stay safe. Truck stops need better security, better lighting, and better surveillance systems. Law enforcement needs to take these attacks seriously and coordinate their efforts across state lines. And trucking companies need to provide their female drivers with the resources and training necessary to protect themselves. Until those changes happen, we have to rely on our own awareness and preparation. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. Do not hesitate to call for help or make noise if you feel threatened. And remember that your safety is more important than any delivery schedule or company policy. I still drive solo routes, and I still love the freedom and independence that comes with life on the road. But I am more careful now, more aware of the risks that come with being a woman alone in remote places. The predators are out there waiting for opportunities, and the only way to stay safe is to make sure they never get the chance to strike. What I am about to tell you happened to me 6 months ago on what should have been a routine regional run through rural Kentucky. I need to share this because I still do not understand what occurred that night, and I hope maybe someone else has experienced something similar. My name is Samantha, and I have been driving the same routes through Kentucky and Tennessee for 4 years. I know these roads like I know my own reflection, every curve and hill, every truck stop and way station. But on this particular night, the familiar became alien, and I found myself trapped in a version of reality that still haunts my dreams. I was hauling auto parts from Louisville to Nashville, a route I had driven at least 50 times before. It was a clear October evening, temperature in the low 60s, perfect driving weather. I left Louisville around 7 p.m., planning to make the delivery by midnight and then catch some sleep before heading back north the next morning. Everything was normal for the first hour. I cruised south on Interstate 65, listening to country music and watching the sunset paint the Kentucky countryside in shades of gold and amber. I passed all the familiar landmarks: the Jim Beam Distillery, the exit for Bardstown, the rolling hills dotted with horse farms that made this part of the state famous. But somewhere around the 8:30 mark, things started to feel different. The first sign that something was wrong came when I passed a billboard that I had never seen before. It was advertising a restaurant called the Crossroads Diner and claimed it was the next exit just 2 miles ahead. I had driven this stretch of highway dozens of times, and there was no restaurant at that exit, just a small gas station and a few houses scattered through the woods. I figured it was a new business, something that had opened since my last run through the area. But as I approached the exit, I could see that the landscape around it had changed too. The gas station was gone, replaced by a cluster of buildings that looked older, more weathered, as if they had been there for decades instead of being newly constructed. I decided to take the exit and check out this mysterious diner, curious about how I could have missed such a significant change to my regular route. But when I turned off the interstate, the exit ramp led to a road I did not recognize. Instead of the narrow county road that should have been there, I found myself on a 4-lane highway that stretched into the distance through terrain that looked subtly wrong. The hills were the right shape, and the trees were the right species, but everything seemed slightly more vivid, more detailed than it should have been. It was like looking at a high-definition version of reality, too sharp and clear to be entirely natural. The Crossroads Diner turned out to be a classic 1950s-style establishment, complete with neon signs and chrome fixtures that gleamed under parking lot lights. The parking lot was full of vehicles, but they were all cars and pickup trucks from decades past. Classic Chevrolets and Fords from the 60s and 70s, all in perfect condition as if they had just rolled off the showroom floor. I parked my rig and walked inside, hoping to find someone who could explain what was happening. The diner was packed with customers, all dressed in clothing styles that seemed to belong to previous eras. Men in work clothes and fedoras, women in dresses and hairdos that I had only seen in old photographs. They all looked up when I entered, and their faces showed polite curiosity but no recognition that anything about my appearance was unusual or out of place. I ordered coffee from a waitress who could have stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting, then asked her about the interstate construction that must have happened recently. She looked at me with genuine confusion. "Interstate?" she said. "Honey, there is not any interstate around here, just the old state highway that runs north to Louisville and south to Nashville. Has been that way for as long as I can remember." I tried to explain that I had just driven off Interstate 65, but she insisted there was no such road. Other customers joined the conversation, all of them agreeing that the main highway through the area was State Route 31, a two-lane road that had been the primary north-south corridor for decades. Feeling increasingly disoriented, I paid for my coffee and walked back outside. My truck was still there in the parking lot, looking massive and modern next to the vintage automobiles surrounding it. But when I climbed into the cab and tried to navigate back to the interstate, I discovered that my GPS was showing locations that did not make sense. According to the device, I was in a town called Millerville, Kentucky, population 2,847. But there was no such town on any map I had ever seen. The GPS was showing roads and highways that differed completely from what I knew to be the actual layout of the area. I decided to ignore the GPS and navigate by memory, driving what I thought should be the route back to Interstate 65. But after 20 minutes of driving through countryside that looked familiar yet subtly different, I found myself on a two-lane highway marked as Route 31, heading south toward Nashville. This was impossible. Route 31 was a historical designation that had been replaced by the interstate system decades ago. Yet here I was, driving on a road that officially no longer existed through a landscape that seemed to be a mixture of the Kentucky I knew and some alternate version that had developed along different lines. Other vehicles on Route 31 were a mixture of vintage cars and more modern vehicles like mine. The drivers I could see looked normal enough, but there was something in their expressions, a kind of resigned acceptance that suggested they were as confused as I was, but had given up trying to understand their situation. I tried my CB radio, hoping to contact other truck drivers who might explain what was happening. Channel 19 was active, but the conversations I heard were strange. Drivers were discussing routes and destinations that did not exist, talking about companies I had never heard of, referencing trucking regulations that bore no resemblance to current federal requirements. "Breaker 19, this is Moondog eastbound on Route 31, one voice said. "Anyone know if the scales are running at the Millerville checkpoint?" "That is a negative, Moondog," another voice replied. "Haven't seen a scale house on this route in 15 years. You might be thinking of the old Interstate 65 corridor, but that got shut down after the big accident back in '73. I keyed my microphone, hoping to get clarification. "This is a southbound driver looking for Interstate 65, I said. "Can anyone give me directions to get back to the main highway?" The channel went silent for a long moment. Then the first voice came back. "Driver, there is no Interstate 65 in this area. Route 31 is the main north-south highway through central Kentucky. Has been since they built it back in 1926. You feeling okay out there?" I was not feeling okay. I was beginning to suspect that I had somehow driven into a version of Kentucky where the interstate highway system had never been built, where the old federal highways still carried the bulk of long-distance traffic, where small towns like Millerville had continued to thrive instead of being bypassed and forgotten. For the next 3 hours, I drove south on Route 31 through this alternate Kentucky, passing through towns that should not have existed and seeing landmarks that had been demolished or replaced decades ago in my version of reality. Everything was slightly different, slightly wrong, as if I was looking at the world through a distorted mirror. The worst part was the growing realization that other people around me seemed to accept this reality as normal. The drivers I spoke to on the CB, the customers at gas stations where I stopped for directions, even the state police officers I saw patrolling the highway, all acted as if this version of Kentucky was the only one that had ever existed. Around 2 a.m., I finally saw signs for Nashville ahead. But when I reached the city limits, I discovered that this was not the Nashville I knew. The skyline was different, dominated by buildings that looked like they belonged to the 1960s rather than the 21st century. The interstate loop around the city was absent, replaced by a network of state highways that wound through neighborhoods I did not recognize. I managed to find my delivery destination, but the warehouse was in a location that should have been occupied by a shopping center in my version of reality. The receiving clerk seemed surprised to see me, claiming they had not been expecting a delivery until the following week. But he accepted my load anyway, and I got my paperwork signed without any major complications. By dawn, I was exhausted and confused, desperate to find my way back to the reality I knew. I started driving north on what the local signs insisted was Route 31, retracing my path from the night before. But somewhere around sunrise, as I was passing through an area that looked like it should have been near Bardstown, the landscape began to shift again. Gradually, the vintage buildings and classic cars gave way to the modern Kentucky I recognized. Route 31 became Interstate 65. The small towns resumed their familiar names, and my GPS began showing locations that matched my memory of the area. By the time I reached Louisville, everything was back to normal. The Crossroads Diner was gone, replaced by the small gas station I remembered. The exit looked exactly as it should have, and there was no sign that the events of the previous night had ever occurred. I completed my return trip without incident, but I have never been able to explain what happened during those 8 hours in alternate Kentucky. I have researched the history of the area, looking for references to towns like Millerville or restaurants like the Crossroads Diner, but I have found nothing that matches my experience. Other drivers I have spoken to have shared similar stories, tales of roads that lead to places that should not exist, of getting lost in familiar territory and finding themselves in versions of reality where history unfolded differently. Most of them dismiss these experiences as the products of fatigue and stress, but I know what I saw and experienced that night. I still drive the Louisville to Nashville route regularly, but I have never encountered that alternate version of Kentucky again. Sometimes late at night when I am driving through the more remote stretches of highway, I wonder if those roads are still there, existing parallel to the ones we know, accessible only under certain circumstances that I do not understand. The experience has made me more aware of the strangeness that can lurk beneath the surface of familiar places. There are layers to reality that most of us never see, alternate versions of the world that exist alongside the one we think we know. For truck drivers who spend their lives traveling between distant places, the boundaries between these realities may be thinner, easier to cross when conditions are right. I have learned to pay closer attention to the small details during my runs, watching for signs that the world around me is beginning to shift into something different. Because if it happened once, it could happen again, and next time I want to be prepared for the journey into the spaces between what is real and what should be impossible. I have to tell someone about what has been happening to me for the past 8 months. Every time I think about quitting trucking altogether, something tells me I need to share this story. Maybe to warn other drivers, or maybe just to convince myself that I am not losing my mind. My name is Taylor, and I have been driving solo runs across the desert Southwest for 6 years. I always preferred the night shift, loved the solitude and the way the highway looks under starlight. But now the darkness holds something I never wanted to find, and I am not sure I can ever escape it. It started last January on a routine run from Phoenix to Albuquerque. I was hauling electronics, expensive stuff that required careful handling and tight security. The weather was perfect, clear and cold, with temperatures in the low 40s and unlimited visibility. I had left Phoenix around 10 p.m., planning to drive straight through and arrive in Albuquerque by dawn. Everything was normal for the first few hours. I cruised east on Interstate 40, listening to late-night talk radio and watching the desert landscape roll past under my headlights. The highway was mostly empty except for the occasional car or long-haul trucker heading in the opposite direction. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere between Flagstaff and Winslow, I first noticed the figure in my mirrors. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe the reflection of my own interior lighting or a shadow cast by my load straps. But as I watched more carefully, I began to see that there was something distinctly human-shaped moving in the darkness behind my trailer. It appeared to be a tall, thin person dressed in dark clothing, walking at a steady pace that somehow kept exact time with my truck's speed. Even though I was traveling at 70 miles per hour, the figure maintained its position about 50 yards behind my trailer. Never falling back, never catching up, just maintaining that precise distance like it was tethered to my rig by an invisible rope. I slowed down to 60, then 55, thinking maybe I would lose whatever optical illusion was creating this effect. But the figure slowed down with me, maintaining that exact same distance. When I sped back up to 75, it matched my speed perfectly, never breaking stride, never showing any sign of effort despite the impossible pace. I tried changing lanes, thinking maybe it was some kind of reflection from a vehicle in the opposite direction. But the figure followed me across the highway, still walking steadily behind my trailer as if the lane change had never occurred. I grabbed my CB radio and called out to any drivers who might be in the area. Breaker 19, this is an eastbound driver on I-40 near Winslow. Anyone else seeing anything strange out here tonight? The response came back immediately. Negative, eastbound. Highway looks clear from here. You feeling okay out there? I wanted to describe what I was seeing, but I knew how crazy it would sound. Oh, person walking behind my truck at highway speeds, following me across lane changes, matching my speed no matter how fast or slow I drove. No one would believe it, and I was beginning to wonder if I should believe it myself. For the next hour, the figure continued its impossible pursuit. I watched it in my mirrors, trying to make out details, but it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No matter how I adjusted my mirrors or turned on additional lights, I could never see its face or any specific features. It was just a dark shape in the rough outline of a person, walking with mechanical precision through the desert night. Around 3 a.m., I pulled into a truck stop near Winona, hoping to break whatever spell was holding this apparition to my truck. I parked under the brightest lights I could find and immediately jumped out to check behind my trailer. Nothing. The pavement was empty, showing no sign that anyone had been walking there. But as I climbed back into my cab and checked my mirrors, the figure was there again, standing motionless about 50 yards behind my truck, waiting. I tried to ignore it, went inside the truck stop, bought coffee, used the restroom, called my dispatcher to check in. But when I came back outside 20 minutes later, it was still there in exactly the same position, as if it had never moved. I completed the rest of my run to Albuquerque with the figure following behind me every mile. When I finally reached my destination and backed up to the loading dock, I watched in my mirrors as it simply faded away like smoke, vanishing into the dawn light. I hoped that would be the end of it, that whatever I had encountered was tied to that specific route or that particular night. But I was wrong. Over the following weeks, the figure began appearing on other runs, other highways, always in my mirrors, always maintaining that exact distance behind my trailer. It did not matter where I was driving or what time of day it was. Desert highways, mountain passes, city streets, the figure was always there. During daylight runs, it appeared as a heat mirage, shimmering in the distance but clearly maintaining the shape of a walking person. At night, it was a solid shadow moving through darkness with inhuman persistence. The worst part was how it began to affect my driving. I found myself constantly checking my mirrors, so obsessed with watching the figure that I started missing turns, running red lights, even rear-ending another vehicle at a stop sign, because I was staring at my mirrors instead of watching the road ahead. Other drivers started commenting on my erratic behavior. My dispatcher received complaints about my sudden lane changes, my inconsistent speeds, my failure to respond to radio calls because I was too focused on whatever was behind me. I tried switching to day runs, thinking maybe the figure would be less visible in sunlight, but it adapted, becoming more translucent but still clearly present, still walking, with that same mechanical stride that matched my speed exactly. I tried taking vacation time, staying home for 2 weeks, hoping to break whatever connection had formed between me and this impossible follower. But the first time I got back in a truck, there it was again, waiting patiently behind my trailer as if it had never left. That was when it started getting into my cab. I first noticed it during a night run through New Mexico in late March. I was checking my mirrors as usual when I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing there, but I could swear I had seen a dark shape seated in my passenger seat for just a split second. Over the following weeks, these sightings became more frequent and more distinct. The figure would appear in my passenger seat, always facing forward, never moving or speaking, just sitting there with that same light-absorbing darkness that made it impossible to see any details. At first, it would only appear for a few seconds before fading away. But gradually the visitations lasted longer. Minutes at a time, then entire hours where I would be driving with this impossible passenger sitting silently beside me. I tried talking to it, asking what it wanted, why it was following me, but it never responded, never acknowledged my presence, never gave any indication that it was aware of my existence. It just sat there, a hole in reality shaped like a person, accompanying me on my endless journeys across the American Southwest. The real terror began when it started reaching for the steering wheel. The first time it happened, I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion. I was driving through the Arizona desert around 2 a.m. when I saw in my peripheral vision a dark hand extending toward my steering wheel. When I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. But I could feel a cold presence beside me, could sense something that wanted to take control of my truck. Over the following weeks, these attempts became more frequent and more aggressive. The figure would reach for my steering wheel, my gear shift, my brake pedal, trying to influence my driving in ways that would have been catastrophic if it had succeeded. I started wearing gloves and long sleeves, thinking maybe physical barriers would help. But the cold touch of its presence could penetrate any material. When it reached for the controls, I could feel ice-cold fingers brushing against my hands. Could sense an alien intelligence trying to override my own will. The worst incident happened 2 months ago on a night run between Tucson and El Paso. I was driving through a particularly remote stretch of desert when the figure appeared in my passenger seat and immediately began reaching for the steering wheel. This time, instead of just brushing against my hands, it seemed to partially merge with my own movements, creating a horrible sensation of shared control. For several terrifying minutes, I was not entirely in command of my own truck. The steering wheel would turn slightly without my input, The speed would increase or decrease according to some alien will that was not my own. I fought against this influence with every ounce of strength I possessed, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white, forcing my foot to maintain pressure on the accelerator despite the creature's attempts to make me brake or accelerate. Finally, I managed to pull over at a rest area and stop the truck. The moment I set the air brakes, the figure vanished, leaving me alone and shaking in my cab. That was when I realized that this thing, whatever it was, did not just want to follow me. It wanted to possess me, to take control of my truck and use it for purposes I could not comprehend. I have been trying to find ways to get rid of it ever since. I have consulted priests, paranormal investigators, even a Native American shaman who specializes in desert spirits. Some of them claim to sense the presence when I describe it, but none of them have been able to remove it or explain what it wants. The shaman told me that certain places in the desert are thin spots where the boundary between our world and others becomes permeable. He suggested that I might have picked up this follower by driving through one of these areas during a time when conditions were right for such contact. But knowing what caused it does not help me get rid of it. The figure is still there, still following behind my truck on every run, still appearing in my passenger seat when conditions are right. And I can feel it getting stronger, more solid, more capable of influencing the physical world. I am afraid that soon it will be able to take complete control, to use my truck as a weapon or to drive it to some destination that exists in its reality rather than mine. When that happens, I do not think I will be coming back. I have started carrying a small video camera in my cab, trying to document these encounters, but the figure never appears on film. It exists only in mirrors and peripheral vision, in the spaces between what is real and what should be impossible. If you are a driver reading this, be careful about the routes you choose, especially through remote desert areas where the landscape has remained unchanged for thousands of years. There are things out there that are older than our highways, older than our civilization, and some of them are still hungry for contact with the modern world. Pay attention to your mirrors, but not too much attention. If you start seeing things that should not be there, do not try to investigate or understand them. Just keep driving, stay focused on the road ahead, and hope that whatever is following you eventually loses interest and moves on to someone else. Because once it attaches itself to you, once it decides that you belong to it, there may be no way to break free. And in the end, you might find yourself becoming a passenger in your own life, watching helplessly as something else takes control of the wheel.